My blood pressure has dropped to 60/40. Dr. Su. Dr. Su, are you listening? Xiao Qin's voice trembled in the operating room, choked with sobs. It didn't sound like it was coming from the air. It was as if a rusty nail had been driven directly into my eardrum. I lay on that cold operating table, my consciousness terrifyingly clear. The anesthesia had started wearing off half an hour ago. I could clearly feel every inch of pain as the scalpel sliced through my abdomen, the cold retractor roughly tearing open my flesh, and the subtle sound of metal rubbing against bone. It felt like it was directly striking my brain. There was no surgeon. Su Wanxing, my wife, a world-renowned surgical expert, put down her scalpel the moment her cell phone rang 3 hours ago. Lin Chuxia's flight was earlier than scheduled, so I had to pick her up. She took off her gloves, didn't even look at me, and said to the operating table that you're in charge of stitching up this laparoscopic appendectomy, Xiao Chun. But Dr. Su, the patient, is your husband. Xiao Chun tried to stop her, her voice full of disbelief. So what? Su Wanxing turned around, her beautiful eyes above the mask filled with undisguised impatience. He was a grown man. He wouldn't die from that knife wound. Chu Xia had just returned to the country and was unfamiliar with everything. If I wasn't there, who would go? Was she supposed to take a taxi? Did he even know she used to be unable to open a bottle cap? I didn't speak, because at that moment, a sharp, pulling pain almost made me grind my teeth to pieces. I stared at the faint reflection at the top of the operating light, watching the hem of her white coat resolutely disappear from my sight. That unique scent of hers, a mixture of disinfectant and cold perfume. It became the final mockery. The operating room door slammed shut, cutting off the outside world and my last hope. The next 4 hours were the longest torture of my life. The line is broken. Xiao Qin's voice was filled with despair, like a drowning person grasping at the last straw, only to find it was a poisonous snake. Don't panic. Apply pressure to stop the bleeding. Quick, get a large hemostat. The bleeding won't stop. I can't get through to Dr. Su. The call cannot be connected. Keep going. This is a level 2 surgery. How can Dr. Su just leave her patient here? This is her husband. The scrub nurse's whispers buzzed in my ears like flies. I could feel warm blood trickling down my side, stickily soaking the surgical drape. Every breath pulled at the wound in my abdomen, the tearing pain making my vision blur. I wanted to scream, to curse, to overturn this damned operating table, but I couldn't make a sound, only managing broken hissing from deep within my throat. Dr. Chen, please. Hurry up. I managed to squeeze out a syllable, my tongue feeling like it was tied in knots. Mr. Gu, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. My hands are shaking. I can't find the ruptured artery. Xiao Chun said in a tearful voice, haphazardly searching inside with tweezers, each touch bringing a spasmodic pain. I heard Xiao Chun trembling as he made a phone call for help, heard the nurses frantically changing equipment, and heard the heart-stopping beeping of the monitor, the frequency increasing rapidly like a countdown to death. 7 hours. A full 7 hours. I don't know how I got through it. Maybe I was numb from the pain, or maybe it was hatred that kept my last shred of consciousness going. I felt like a fish that had been gutted and exposed to the air, waiting to rot or dry out. Just when I was about to faint, the operating room door was finally pushed open. A familiar scent of perfume wafted in. It was Su Wanxing. She had changed into casual clothes, but her expensive cashmere coat still seemed to carry the dust from the airport expressway and a faint smell of disinfectant from the cabin. What's going on? Her voice was still clear and crisp, but with a hint of annoyance at being disturbed. Isn't it over yet? I've already picked up the people and come back. Xiao Chun was covered in sweat, feeling as if he had seen a savior, yet also as if he had seen the king of hell. His legs went weak, and he almost knelt down. Dr. Su, after you left, the patient had a massive hemorrhage. We managed to suture him, but the risk of infection was very high, and the anesthesia had long worn off. We didn't dare to increase the dosage, fearing it would affect the central nervous system. He's been awake the whole time. Su Wanxing frowned, seemingly finding it troublesome, even somewhat annoying. She walked to the operating table and looked down at me. My vision was already blurred, my pupils dilated from blood loss and pain, but I could feel her gaze sweeping over my pale face, devoid of any warmth, as if she were looking at a stain waiting to be cleaned. Useless, she muttered under her breath, unsure whether she was referring to Xiao Chun or herself. She picked up her phone, swiped a few times, and suddenly a smile appeared on her lips. A genuine, soft smile. Chu Xia said she was hungry and wanted to eat crab roast soup dumplings from that restaurant in the south of the city, and I would have to go queue up myself. She said this to herself, and then she actually pressed the video call button. The camera was pointed at me without warning. A delicate female voice came from the other end of the screen, deliberately weak. Wanqing, who is this? Her face looks so pale that it's quite frightening. Nothing, just an insignificant person. Su Wanqing's voice was so gentle it could melt hearts, a stark contrast to her earlier coldness. She'd just had minor surgery, so she was using him as practice. How was it? Tired from the flight? Did anyone dare bother you? I'm exhausted, thank goodness you're here. This lousy plane, the seats were rock hard. By the way, didn't your husband mind? After all that, you left him behind to pick me up. Su Wanqing chuckled softly, her fingers casually tracing my exposed, bluish shoulder from hypothermia. As if caressing a lifeless object. Him? What does he know? Saving people is my duty. Picking you up is my personal matter. They're two separate things. Besides, he's lying on the operating table. He's not going anywhere. It's good for him to hear, so he won't be an eyesore at home all the time. Lin Chuxia's silvery laughter, full of superiority and smugness, came from the other end of the video. As I lay on the operating table, listening to this conversation, the excruciating pain from my abdominal incision seemed to vanish in that instant. In its place came a chill that seemed to seep from the depths of my bones, so cold that even my fingertips trembled. Insignificant people. Let's practice. It won't run away. It's an eyesore. Every word felt like a red-hot steel needle, piercing my temple and stirring my brain. I strained to turn my eyes and look at Su Wanqing. She was intently staring at her phone screen, her eyes filled with an overwhelming love, something I had never received in the 3 years of our marriage. Even when I had early-stage stomach cancer, she only coldly said it was a minor surgery, that it would be removed. She had never shown such tenderness. Give me the phone. My voice was hoarse like a broken gong, every syllable carrying a bloody stench, as if I had swallowed a handful of sand. Su Wanqing paused, glancing down at me, as if only now realizing I was still awake and able to speak. She scoffed, not only refusing to give me the phone, but also bringing it closer so Lin Chuxia could hear me more clearly. Did you hear that? Your CEO Gu is trying to take the phone from me. And that voice, it sounds like a broken gong. Su Wanqing. I stared at her and said, enunciating each word clearly using the last bit of air in my lungs, before handing her the phone. This time, my tone was devoid of any emotion, anger, or pleading. It was only a deathly stillness, like a deep, unfathomable pool of water. Su Wanqing finally realized something was wrong. Her smile faded, and she impatiently moved her phone further away. Guyan, you're on the operating table right now, don't push your luck. I'll deal with you after I've settled Chu Xiaoyan. If you keep making a fuss, believe me, I'll have someone give you a sedative injection. Take care of my business. I looked at her delicate yet indifferent face and suddenly laughed. Because it aggravated her wound, the laughter was mixed with suppressed groans, sounding particularly eerie, like the cry of an owl. No need, I said. I slowly extended my hand, free from the 4-needle, from under the surgical drape. My fingers were cold and stiff from blood loss, and my knuckles were white from the effort. But I still managed to accurately pull a folded document from under the pillow, a place she never bothered to check. I printed it out 3 days ago and left it here. Back then, I still clung to a ridiculous fantasy that maybe it would come in handy someday, that maybe it would win her back. Now that fantasy seems like an insult to myself. I looked at Su Wanqing and with all my might threw the document at her feet. The papers unfurled, and the bold, black lettering on the cover pierced the disinfectant smell of the operating room. Divorce agreement. Su Wanqing's expression froze instantly. Her eyes widened, her long eyelashes trembled as she looked at the documents on the ground, then at me, as if she had heard the biggest joke in the world or seen some unbelievable monster. Are you crazy? She bent down, picked up the agreement, glanced at it, and then disdainfully tore it in half. The movement was swift and clean, like tearing up a piece of waste paper. Guyan, who do you think you are? Without me, Su Wanqing, how many days can a piece of trash like you who makes a living by writing code survive? Don't act crazy here. Wait until you've recovered from your injuries, and see how I deal with you." She tossed the torn pieces of paper around it, and they fell like snowflakes onto my face and chest, carrying the warmth of her fingertips and a faint scent of perfume. I didn't dodge. I just watched her quietly, watching this woman I once thought I would spend my life with. I watched her pick up her phone again, giving Lin Xuxia a gentle smile on the screen as if nothing had happened. "It's nothing, just a mad dog barking. Let's continue." "Yes, the soup dumplings should be eaten while they're hot." Just then I moved. I didn't pick up the broken pieces. Instead, I felt around for the seemingly ordinary smartwatch on my wrist. It was a limited edition from overseas that she had casually tossed to me for my birthday last year, saying that I didn't need anything better anyway. I pressed a very discreet button on the side. The button felt no different from the others, but I knew it was connected to a completely different system. "Su Wanqing." I spoke again, my voice not loud, but clearly drowning out her conversation with Lin Xuxia, carrying a metallic quality. She paused, turned her head in confusion, and frowned. "Are you ever going to stop?" I grinned, revealing a smile that was more like a grimace, but my eyes held a bottomless darkness, a look she had never seen before, which sent a chill down her spine. "What you just tore up wasn't the agreement," I said slowly, each word like a carefully polished icicle, "your last chance." She froze, nearly dropping her phone. Also, I lowered my eyelids, concealing all the emotions in my eyes, and said in a low but clear voice, "Check the notifications on your bank app on your phone. In the 7 hours while you were on the phone, your offshore account used for laundering patent fees, the one with the last 7 digits of the account number being 7781, was just frozen by the International Clearing Organization. The reason given is that the source of funds is unclear and it is suspected of involving a large-scale illegal transfer." Su Wanqing's smile froze completely. She instinctively swiped to unlock her phone, her fingers trembling with panic. The screen's light illuminated her face, which had instantly lost all color. A few seconds later, she suddenly looked up, and for the first time, a look of panic appeared in her eyes, along with a hint of barely perceptible fear. She stared at me intently, as if she were seeing me for the first time. "It's you," she cried out, her voice shrill. And I slowly closed my eyes, no longer looking at her distorted face. The game has begun, but this is just the appetizer. The real pain is just beginning for her. I could feel her erratic breathing, hear her rapid breathing, and hear Lin Xuxia's faint question from the other end of the video. "Wanqing, what's wrong?" Su Wanqing hurriedly hung up the video call, then looked at me again, her eyes filled with an indescribable complexity, anger, surprise, and a hint of dishonor from being deceived. "Guyan, who exactly are you? How did you know about that account? Who gave you that access?" I didn't answer, but instead moved my other hand with difficulty, pressing it against the bleeding gauze on my abdomen. The pain caused a fine layer of cold sweat to bead on my forehead, but my voice remained unusually calm. "That miniature monitor you left in my belly, the model is MX7, right? You said it was for real-time monitoring of post-operative recovery data to prevent abdominal adhesions. Its signal is good." Su Wanqing was struck dumb, frozen in place. MX7 was the latest implantable device she had helped develop. Besides medical data, it also possessed extremely strong environmental perception and data interception capabilities, making it one of her powerful tools for secretly gathering intelligence on competitors. She had always believed that this secret was known only to her. "You're monitoring me?" Her voice trembled slightly. "Surveillance?" I opened my eyes, a desolate wasteland before me. "The moment you abandoned me to pick you up in early summer, it automatically switched to backup power and activated the data synchronization protocol. Every phone call you made, every message you sent, including your conversation with Lin Xuxia just now, and the keys to those special data packets you transmitted overseas using the hospital's internal network over the past 6 months, they're all here." I tapped my temple with my finger. The operating room was deathly silent. The only sound was the monotonous ticking of the monitors, which now sounded like a death knell. Xiao Chun and the nurse were already pale with fright, huddled in a corner, not daring to make a sound. They probably never dreamed that the usually gentle and refined Mr. Gu would hide such an unfathomable side. Su Wanqing's face flushed red and then paled. She lunged forward, trying to grab my collar, but stopped midair. She saw the screen of my wristwatch light up, displaying lines of code that were both incredibly familiar and terrifying to her. the interface for verifying the core keys to her overseas assets. Gu Yan, you dare touch my money. I'll make you wish you were dead. She screamed, trying to use her usual authority to mask her inner panic. Worse than death. I chuckled softly, the movement aggravating my wounds, that yet I felt no pain. Su Wanxing, do you think my current state could be more painful than these 7 hours? I looked at her, my gaze piercing through her facade like an icicle. That $3 billion was just interest. You used your marriage as a cover to steal core medical data for profit. You falsified medical records to cover up a major medical accident and framed someone else. You even tampered with my sister's accidental surgery years ago. Today, we'll settle these scores point one by one. You're talking nonsense. What does my sister's matter have to do with you? Su Wanxing's pupils contracted sharply, clearly not expecting me to even know about this. It's all right. I coughed up blood, my smile cruel. Then why is that scar on your abdomen in the exact same location as the incision in my sister's surgical record? Su Wanxing, your arrogance is your grave. Did you think my 3 years of submissiveness were because I loved you? I ignored her instantly pale face and violently trembling body, closed my eyes again as if all my strength had been exhausted, but the cold smile on my lips lingered for a long time. Get out. With my last breath, I uttered those 3 words to Su Wanxing. You have 10 minutes to see Lin Chuxiao one last time before the audit team arrives at your house. But I bet she's already asking for your account password, isn't she? Su Wanxing let out a whimper like a wounded wild animal that staggered backward and finally turned around and stumbled out of the operating room. The operating room door closed again. I lay in a cold pool of blood, listening to my faint heartbeat, but while the data stream on my wristwatch screen continued to scroll silently. The 7-hour ordeal of being slowly sliced to death was over. But for Su Wanxing, the lifelong torture of being slowly sliced to death was only just beginning. I groped around, my fingers stained with blood, and picked up the 2-pin nibs that Su Wanxing had torn up and discarded from the edge of the operating table. The sharp metal pierced my fingertips, drawing blood, but I felt no pain, because I know that this blood will soon turn into her tears. But I never softened my heart. Su Wanxing stumbled out of the operating room, her high heels clicking frantically in the empty corridor. Her mind was blank, filled only with Gu Yan's cold, emotionless eyes and the constantly scrolling code on her wristwatch screen, a code symbolizing her life and fortune. Audit team, Lin Chuxiao, 3 billion. These words swirled in her mind like a curse. She couldn't believe it. She absolutely refused to believe that Gu Yan, who spent all his time at home coding and doted on her, could have such power. He must be bluffing her. Yes, stop bluffing her. When did he acquire such abilities? He didn't even have a decent social media account. She rushed into the changing room, locked the door, and her hands trembling as she unlocked her phone again. The red warning from her bank app was still glaringly obvious. Account frozen due to abnormal activity. Please contact customer service. Undeterred, she switched to what she thought was an absolutely secured, encrypted communication app, her dedicated channel for contacting her overseas contacts. However, instead of the usual green online icon, she saw a cold red exclamation mark. Connection failed. Server unresponsive. Impossible. She gasped, her nails digging deep into her palms. She immediately dialed the number assigned to her, but a mechanical female voice answered. The number you dialed is not in service. Is the number invalid? Just 3 days ago, they were talking on the phone, discussing how to secure their next funding round. How did the number become disconnected? Panic overwhelmed him like a tidal wave. She forced herself to calm down and opened the medical equipment supply chain management system she controlled. This was the cornerstone of her power. All equipment and medicines depended on it. The screen loaded for a long time, finally displaying an interface she had never seen before, a pure black background with only a white progress bar and a line of small text below. System maintenance in progress, estimated recovery time. Infinity. Gu Yan, it really was you. Su Wanxing gritted her teeth, her eyes blazing with anger. She was finally certain that Gu Yan was behind all of this. But how did he do it? How could he possibly hack into an internal system that could even bypass the military's firewall? She suddenly remembered Zero, which Gu Yan had just mentioned. It was a legendary hacker organization, elusive and rarely seen, said to be able to wipe a multinational conglomerate off the face of the earth in a second. Guyan, that gigolo, could he be Zero? Ridiculous. This is utterly absurd. Just then, there was a knock on the locker room door. Dr. Su, are you there? A major problem has occurred on the supply chain. It was the anxious voice of Lao Zhang, the head of the purchasing department. All the sterile instrument packs are locked in the system and can't be released. We have 12 surgeries scheduled for today. If this causes any delays. I understand. Get out. Su Wanqing snapped. She took a deep breath, straightened her clothes, and tried her best to adopt her usual haughty demeanor as she opened the door. Old Zhang noticed her pale face and paused for a moment, but quickly reported. Dr. Su at the technical department checked and said that a root-level command has been implanted in the system's backend. Only the highest-level administrator can unlock it. But we checked the logs, and the highest-level administrator's login IP shows it's at home. At home. Guyan is at home. Su Wanqing's heart clenched. She immediately called Guyan, but all she heard was a cold, busy tone. She tried again, still busy. She dialed frantically until her phone indicated that the number she had dialed was busy. Who was he talking to? Lin Chuxiao? Or that so-called audit team? Su Wanqing couldn't stay any longer. She had to go back. She had to confront Guyan face-to-face and make him stop this foolish behavior. She drove at breakneck speed all the way back to the villa that had once been called home. Pushing open the door, the house was pitch black, with no lights on. A faint, lingering smell of blood and disinfectant filled the air, the smell of Guyan. Guyan, you come out here. Su Wanqing turned on the light, the glare making her squint. The living room was empty, but on the coffee table was a new document next to which was the divorce agreement that she had torn up and then pieced back together by someone. She grabbed the new document, and when she looked at it under the light, her pupils suddenly contracted. That wasn't a divorce agreement, but a notice of share transfer. It clearly stated, due to her long-term dereliction of duty and abuse of her position for illegal transactions, that a special board resolution has been passed to immediately suspend all her positions within the Su's medical group and freeze all shares under her name. At the end was an electronic signature she had never seen before, a black rose entwined with thorns. It was the symbol of Zero Organization. Rumor had it that anyone who saw this symbol would either die or be maimed. No, this can't be real. Su Wanqing murmured to herself, the documents slipping from her hands and falling to the ground. She rushed to the study on the second floor, where Guyan usually stayed. The study door was ajar, and she pushed it open and entered. Guyan wasn't inside, but the sight of the study made her gasp. The desk, which had been piled high with programming books and two high-end computers, was now completely empty. The computers were gone, the books were gone, even the scraps of paper in the trash can have been cleaned out. The entire room looked as if no one had ever lived there. Only on the desk was an open safe, completely empty. She rushed to the safe, which contained some of her personal belongings, and a paper backup notebook containing all her secrets. Now that everything was gone, she slumped to the floor, her body ice cold. Guyan's actions weren't impulsive. He had planned this for a long time. He had made all the preparations, just waiting for the moment she left the operating table. Just then, her phone rang again. It was an unknown number. Su Wanqing answered the phone with trembling hands. Hello? Ms. Su Wanqing, we are a third-party auditing firm. Regarding the irregularities in your offshore accounts and the suspected violation of the anti-money laundering law, we need your cooperation in the investigation as soon as possible. Furthermore, we have preliminary evidence that you have exploited vulnerabilities in the medical system for illegal arbitrage. Please appear at the designated location within 24 hours for questioning. The audit team, they've really arrived. Su Wanqing hung up the phone, her mind a jumbled mess. She tried to contact the old housekeeper, but the call wouldn't go through. She rushed to the window and saw several workers who usually trimmed the plants silently packing up their things and leaving the yard one after another. She was the only one left in the entire villa. Note there was also the ever-present shadow left by Guyan. She suddenly remembered Guyan's last words on the operating table. Get out, go see your Lin Chuxiao one last time. Lin Chuxiao. Su Wanqing grasped at a straw and immediately dialed Lin Chuxiao's number. It rang 7 or 8 times before being answered. Wanqing, what's wrong? I just finished showering. Lin Chuxiao's voice was languid and comfortable, with soft music seemingly playing in the background. Early summer. Guyan has gone mad. He froze my account, hacked the system, and now the audit team is coming for me. What should I do? Please help me. Su Wanqing said incoherently, her voice trembling with tears. Lin Chuxiao was silent for a few seconds on the other end of the phone, then let out a soft laugh. The laugh was devoid of its previous sweetness, replaced only by indifference and mockery. Su Wanqing, that you only remember me now? Too late. Early summer. What do you mean? Didn't we agree? Su Wanqing's heart skipped a beat. What did you say? You agreed to divide the Su family's assets together? Lin Chuxiao's voice suddenly turned sharp. Su Wanqing, don't you even look in the mirror and see what kind of person you are now? Your account is frozen? Serves you right. You think Gu Yin is really a pushover? Let me tell you that I've investigated. He was the mastermind behind that Black Thursday 3 years ago that bankrupted 3 major European conglomerates overnight. You actually dared to sleep next to him and even thought about cheating on him? You really have a death wish. Su Wanqing felt as if she had been struck by lightning, and almost dropped her phone. You. What did you say? Gu Yin. He's from Black Thursday. Otherwise, how long do you think you could hide your dirty tricks? Gu Yin knew all along. He was just waiting for you to slip up. Now look what's happened. He's sold you out, and might even make a profit. Lin Chuxia sneered. As for me, I originally wanted to use you to make some money. But since you're no longer useful, let's go our separate ways. Oh, right, I forgot to tell you, those little gadgets you left with me. Those recordings you used to threaten the old shareholders. I've already sent them to the relevant parties. Good luck, former President Su. Beep, beep, beep. The call ended. Su Wanqing stared blankly at her phone, the screen's light reflecting on her bloodless face. Lin Chuxiao's words were like poisoned daggers, shattering her last shred of hope. Gu Yin already knew. He had been watching her performance all along. He was even the mastermind behind that infamous Black Thursday. A tremendous fear gripped her. She recalled the occasional air of indifference Gu Yin displayed, the detachment that seemed to control everything, and his eyes that appeared to see right through people. She had always thought it was just the dullness of a programmer, but it turned out it was the cold indifference of ignoring ants. Suddenly remembering something, she rushed to the kitchen like a madwoman, opened the refrigerator, grabbed a bottle of mineral water, and smashed it to the floor. Glass shattered, water spilled everywhere. She then rushed to the wine cabinet and smashed the expensive bottles of red wine one by one. She needed to vent, needed to break something to prove she still existed. However, no matter how much she vandalized the room, the invisible, suffocating pressure only grew heavier. She could almost feel Gu Yin lurking in some corner, coldly watching her disheveled state. She collapsed amidst the shards, red wine, soaking her designer suit. Trembling, she picked up the pieced-together divorce papers from the floor. This time, she didn't tear them up, but clutched them tightly in her hand, her knuckles turning white. Gu Yin, how dare you treat me like this? I will not let you go. She hissed in a low voice, her voice filled with resentment and unwillingness. Just then, a soft click came from the doorway, as if someone had turned the lock with a key. Su Wanqing suddenly looked up, staring at the doorway in horror. From the shadows, a tall, slender figure slowly entered. It wasn't Gu Yin, but a middle-aged man in a black suit, his face expressionless. He held a tablet computer in his hand, glanced at Su Wanqing slumped on the floor, and spoke in a flat tone, as if reading from a prepared script. Ms. Su Wanqing, by order of Zero, please sign this document. Sign it, and you can keep this villa and your basic monthly living expenses. Don't sign. He paused, his gaze sweeping over the mess on the floor. Everything you own will be taken back, including the clothes you're wearing. Su Wanqing stared intently at the middle-aged man, then glanced at the document on his tablet, a complete divorce agreement that stripped her of all social status and property, leaving her penniless. She knew this was no joke. Gu Yin was truly going to drag her down from her pedestal and into the mud. She trembled as she reached out her hand. The moment she touched the cold electronic pin, she finally couldn't hold back and let out a desperate cry. Outside the villa, in the shadows of the street corner, Gu Yin sat in an unmarked car, silently watching the scene through the one-way window. His abdomen was wrapped in thick bandages, his face was still pale, but his eyes were as sharp as an eagle's. He rolled down the car window, lit a cigarette, and the crimson sparks flickered in the darkness. The game has entered its second phase. He muttered to himself, exhaling a puff of smoke that blurred his expression. Su Wanqing signed the document. The moment the electronic pen swiped across the screen, she felt a part of her soul die with it. The middle-aged man put away his tablet, nodded slightly, and then left silently just as he had come. No extra glances, no sarcastic words. That absolute indifference was more devastating to Su Wanqing than any humiliation. She became the only living thing in this luxurious villa, a prisoner under house arrest. Her cell phone still worked, but apart from a few unimportant numbers, that most contacts either couldn't reach her or hung up immediately. She tried contacting a lawyer, only to be told that Ms. Su, your legal fees account has been frozen, and we cannot continue to serve you. She contacted her colleagues at the hospital. The deputy director who had once fawned over her was now polite but distant. Dr. Su, there are new instructions from the group. Please rest assured and recuperate. I will temporarily handle the department's work. Rest and recuperate peacefully? She's a pariah now. Even more terrifying that she discovered that all her credit and debit cards were invalid. She tried to take anything of value from the villa, like her treasured limited edition surgical instruments, but found that whatever she touched triggered a piercing alarm only she could hear, along with a flashing red light from a hidden camera on the wall. She knew this was Guyan's warning. She was allowed to stay here only because Guyan hadn't planned to let her die out there, and nothing more. On the third day, the real blow came. Su Wanqing habitually logged into her secret email account, which she used to receive overseas consulting fees. In the past, it would be flooded daily with emails from all over the world, accompanied by notifications of varying amounts of US dollars deposited into her account. But today, her inbox was empty. Undeterred, she opened her spam folder, which contained dozens of automated system replies from different banks and financial institutions, all with similar content. The account had been permanently closed due to suspicious transactions. Funds were being traced, and withdrawal requests could not be processed at this time. Trembling, she clicked on the private bank account in Switzerland that she thought was the safest place. The login screen appeared normal, but after she entered the dynamic password, instead of a balance, a cold dialog box appeared. Account frozen. Reason: court order. $3 billion US. That was all the wealth she had accumulated over the years through medical patents and clandestine asset transfers. That was the foundation of her ability to thrive even after leaving the Su family. And now that it's all gone. Frozen? Which court? Guyan's influence extends all the way to Switzerland? No. No. Su Wanqing clutched her head, curled up on the sofa, and let out suppressed sobs. She remembered Lin Chuxia's words. Guyan already knew. So he didn't only start acting after discovering she had abandoned the operating table. He had already laid a trap waiting for her to fall into it. That 3 billion yuan had probably already been transferred, frozen, or even devoured by him. In her despair, she thought of Lin Chuxia again. Although Lin Chuxia had been cold-hearted on the phone, they had once been in a relationship, and Lin Chuxia must have received quite a bit of benefit. Perhaps Lin Chuxia could help her? At least could she tell her what Guyan really wanted? She dialed Lin Chuxia's number using the villa's landline, and this time the call was answered quickly. Su Wanqing, you still dare to call? Lin Chuxia's voice was clearly impatient. Early summer. Please tell me what exactly does Guyan want? My money. My 3 billion. Su Wanqing pleaded humbly. A sneer came from the other end of the phone. Your money? Su Wanqing, aren't you awake yet? Of that 3 billion, how much is clean? Not to mention it's now owned by Gu. Who is Guyan? He can make you lie on the operating table for 7 hours and still not die. And he can make your money vanish into thin air. You think I want to mess with that kind of ruthless person? Let me tell you that I'm about to be investigated too. All because of your mess. Don't contact me again. Or I won't be able to protect myself either. Early summer. Don't hang up. We can cooperate. Guyan is only one person. If we join forces, we will definitely find his weakness. Su Wanqing said urgently. Cooperate? Lin Chuxiao interrupted her, her tone full of sarcasm. Su Wanqing, haven't you grasped the situation yet? You're a cripple now. Guyan could crush you with a flick of his finger. Cooperate with you? Am I out of my mind? Oh, right, I forgot to tell you I'm leaving here soon, going to a place Guyan can't find for the time being. You can enjoy the rest of your life in this beautiful cage. Goodbye. No. Farewell forever. The call was disconnected again. This time with a busy signal. Su Wanqing slumped onto the sofa, her last glimmer of hope extinguished. Lin Chuxiao was running away too. Everyone had run away. Only she remained trapped in this golden cage, watching helplessly as the empire she had built crumbled and her wealth vanished. Just then, a financial news report was playing on television. Su's medical group's stock price plummeted again today, hitting a record low. Reports indicate that Ms. Su Wanqing, the group's former chief medical officer, is under internal investigation for suspected serious financial irregularities and medical malpractice. Notably, a new investment fund called Beyond Capital is aggressively accumulating shares of Su's group on the secondary market, with its stake nearing the threshold for mandatory disclosure. Market analysts believe that Beyond Capital has strong backing and may be related to the recent activity of international capital. Beyond Capital? Guyan's. Su Wanqing stared intently at the television screen, watching the Su Group's logo being obscured by ever-increasing red lines indicating a decline in its value. That was the family business her father had built from scratch, the foundation upon which she had rapidly expanded after marrying Gu Yan, leveraging his technical expertise. Now, Gu Yan wanted to use the advantages she had provided to devour the entire Su Group. A surge of rage erupted, burning away her despair and leaving only a frenzied hatred. She couldn't let it end like this. Su Wanqing absolutely couldn't. Gu Yan wanted to take everything away. She wouldn't let him. She struggled to her feet and rushed into the study. Although the computer was gone, the network interface was still there. She used her phone's hotspot to try and log into the encrypted database she could still remember using unconventional methods. She recalled Gu Yan mentioning that he had built a massive distributed computing network, codenamed Hive, for data analysis and processing. If she could find the Hive's access point, perhaps she could trace back some of Gu Yan's core data, or even find the whereabouts of that 3 billion. Relying on her remaining technical memory and understanding of Gu Yan's habits, as she frantically tapped on the phone screen, typing in complex commands. Sweat streamed down her forehead, dripping onto the screen. Her eyes were bloodshot, and she muttered to herself, "It must be here. He's so arrogant, he must have left a back door." Found it. Finally, she successfully connected to an anonymous node. The data stream inside was astonishingly large, with various encrypted files appearing one after another. Her fingers trembled with excitement as she randomly clicked on a file that looked like a log. The file opened, but it didn't contain any core data. It only contained a single line of text that kept scrolling repeatedly. "Pride is the original sin. Greed is the abyss. Su Wanqing. Everything you have stems from this. And will also be destroyed by it. 0. Immediately afterward, her phone screen went black, then lit up again, displaying a picture. It was of her on the operating table, her face covered in blood, her eyes vacant. Below the picture, there was a line of text. "Want to play with fire? Be careful not to get burned. Every attempt you make accelerates your demise. Next time, it won't be data that disappears." 0. Su Wanqing threw her phone away in terror, as if it were a hot potato. Gu Yan had been watching her the whole time. He had anticipated her actions. This moment was clearly a trap he had deliberately set for her. She stumbled backward, knocking over the vase behind her. Shards scattered everywhere, just like her shattered pride and illusions. She finally understood that the gap between her and Gu Yan was not power, nor money, but a difference in dimensions. She was still fighting with worldly rules, while Gu Yan had already woven a net for her in the digital world. She looked around the empty, luxurious yet cold villa and felt a bone-chilling cold for the first time. This was not a home. It was the most magnificent tomb that Gu Yan had tailored for her. And she was walking step by step toward the moment when the coffin lid would fall. Outside the window, the night was deep. A black sedan was parked silently across the street. Inside, Gu Yan looked at the distraught figure inside the villa, his eyes unwavering. He lightly tapped the keyboard of the car's computer, and a surveillance video began to automatically upload to several specific encrypted email addresses, a gift sent to several shareholders of the Su Group who were still observing the situation. "The financial black hole is just the beginning," Gu Yan said in a low voice, a cold smile curving his lips. Next, it's time for you to taste what it means to be utterly disgraced. He instructed the driver, drive. Go see that intern. Xiao Chun. It's time to give him some real lessons. The engine roared. And the black sedan disappeared into the night. Inside the villa. Su Wanqing hugged her knees. Amidst the shattered pieces, letting out a desperate whimper like a wounded wild animal. Her nightmare had only just begun. At 7 o'clock in the morning, Su Wanqing was awakened by a series of urgent doorbell rings. She slept curled up on the study floor all night, surrounded by shattered wine bottles and dried blood. Her expensive cashmere coat was stained, and her hair was disheveled. There was no trace of the elegance of a first-time surgeon. The doorbell rang like a saw, ripping at her fragile nerves. She woke with a start, practically crawling to the door, and peered through the peephole. Two people in gray uniforms stood outside the door, wearing badges from the group's compliance department. Su Wanqing's heart sank. The compliance department. That was the agency Gu Yin had recently appointed, specifically responsible for purging the influence she had left behind. She didn't open the door, but asked in a hoarse voice through the door, "Who is it?" Ms. Su Wanqing. The person outside spoke in a flat, emotionless tone, as if reading from a prepared statement. According to the resolution of the extraordinary shareholders meeting of Beyond Capital and the group's newly revised articles of association, that you need to cooperate with us in conducting an asset inventory. Additionally, regarding several overseas patent licensing projects you previously led, there are procedural flaws. Please come to the conference room on the 17th floor of headquarters before noon today to provide explanations. Procedure flaws? Su Wanqing sneered. Gu Yin was just nitpicking. She didn't even dare leave the house now. If she did, she probably wouldn't be able to come back. I'm sick. Another day. She replied, forcing herself to speak. Ms. Su. This is a written notice. A document was slipped under the door for your signature. If you refuse to cooperate, we will apply for enforcement in accordance with our regulations. Furthermore, please be aware that your private communication lines are being monitored. Any attempt to contact the outside world will be considered obstruction of investigation. The document slipped to the ground. Su Wanqing picked it up and saw it was stamped with a bright red electronic seal, the wording stern and leaving no room for negotiation. Forced execution? Gu Yin was treating her like an object to be disposed of at will. She leaned against the door, panting heavily. The compliance officers hadn't left. They stood outside, like two cold statues. They didn't care whether she agreed or not. They were simply carrying out orders. This absolute, overwhelming power made her feel more powerless than ever before. Just then, her personal cell phone vibrated. It was an unfamiliar number, but the area code indicated it was the hospital's main switchboard. Su Wanqing hesitated for a moment, but still answered the call. "Wanqing," came Xiao Chen's excited yet panicked voice from the other end of the phone, amidst background noise. "Where are you? Something terrible has happened. This morning at 9 o'clock, the globally broadcast robot-assisted remote complex liver resection surgery was supposed to be performed by you. But your permissions in the system have been locked. Now everyone's saying you've been suspended. The live broadcast was starting in 40 minutes. And experts from all over the world were watching. What are we going to do? Live surgery broadcast." Su Wanqing's head buzzed. This was her most important public appearance of the year, at the grand finale of the International Medical Summit. She had specially invited Lin Chuxiao to observe, precisely to showcase her irreplaceable status to Gu Yin and the world. If this surgery succeeded, it would not only solidify her position in the academic world, but also inject a powerful boost into the faltering Su group. Gu Yin couldn't possibly be unaware of its importance. "Access is locked." "Who locked it?" Su Wanqing asked sharply, even though she already knew the answer in her heart. "The system displayed. It's the highest administrator privileges. And the ID in the operation log is." Xiao Chen's voice was trembling with tears. "It's 0. Sister Wanqing. It's that legendary 0. Right now, the directors are all arguing. Some say to cancel the live stream. Some say to replace the person. It's complete chaos. Please come back and take charge." 0. It's 0 again. Gu Yin was using this method to pull her down from her pedestal in front of the whole world. Su Wanqing's blood rushed to her head. It then quickly receded, leaving behind a cold numbness. She flung open the door. And the two compliance department personnel still stared at her expressionlessly. Get out of the way. Su Wanqing's voice was as cold as ice. The two men exchanged a glance, but did not stop her. They simply stepped aside to make way for her. One of them calmly said, "Ms. Su, please do not leave the city until the inventory is completed. Also, your vehicle has been restricted from use." Su Wanqing didn't even glance at them, practically running into the garage in her high heels. Her red sports car was still there, but the in-car system screen was completely black, and the start button was unresponsive. Gu Yan even had control of that. She angrily slammed her fist on the steering wheel and flagged down a passing taxi. "To the International Conference Center, quick," she gasped to the driver. The taxi driver glanced at her through the rearview mirror, the hint of surprise and barely perceptible disdain flashing in his eyes. Su Wanqing's current image was a far cry from the renowned doctor who used to drive luxury cars. But he didn't ask any questions and sped off. On the way, Su Wanqing kept refreshing her phone. On social media, the hashtag Su Wanqing absent from global live surgery hashtag had begun to gain traction. Various speculations were flying around. Was Dr. Su unwell? Was she caught in the internal strife at the Su Group? Was it a technical malfunction? Some even dug up rumors that she had left the operating table a few days ago. Although the posts were quickly deleted, Su Wanqing knew that Gu Yan's influence had already extended into the public sphere. At 8:50, Su Wanqing arrived at the conference center. The backstage area was in chaos. Several vice deans and department heads were arguing around the control panel. On the large screen, a countdown timer displayed. 9 minutes and 15 seconds until the live surgery broadcast begins. Below the stage, a densely packed group of experts and reporters from various countries were already seated, their whispers like a tidal wave. Make way, everyone." Su Wanqing pushed through the crowd and squeezed to the front of the control panel. The technical director in charge of the live broadcast saw her, paused for a moment, and then looked troubled. "Dr. Su, you've arrived. The system permissions are indeed locked. We've tried all the backup passwords, but none of them work. The backend shows that control is on an external encrypted node, which we have no access to at all. Give it to me." Su Wanqing snatched the keyboard, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she typed commands. She was an expert in medical systems and also had some knowledge of low-level code. She attempted to bypass the access verification and forcibly take over the main control program of the surgical robot. However, the code stream on the screen poured down like a waterfall, and every time she entered a command, a dialog box that she knew all too well would pop up. Access denied. Reason: divine retribution. Divine punishment? A divine punishment? Gu Yan was mocking her. "Dr. Su, it's too late." The head nurse was almost in tears. The patient was already anesthetized and wheeled into the operating room. The global live stream couldn't be interrupted. Su Wanqing ignored him, her eyes glued to the screen, large beads of sweat forming on her forehead. She refused to believe it. She refused to believe Gu Yan could be so cunning. She found a hidden backdoor port point, one she had reserved during the initial design phase. She entered an extremely long encryption key, her last hope. Key verification successful. Su Wanqing was overjoyed, but the next second the screen did not switch to the surgical control interface, but instead a full-screen video window popped up. The video shows no operating room and no patients. In the center of the image lay an empty operating chair. Above the chair, lines of text floated continuously. The content of those words caused Su Wanqing's pupils to contract sharply, and her breath to catch in her throat. That's not code, that's chat logs. These were encrypted chat logs between her and an overseas contact codenamed C. The logs revealed allegations that she leaked clinical trial data for a drug not yet on the market, accepted huge bribes, and even detailed how she falsified records of a failed surgery, shifting the blame to a young doctor and ruining his career. Each record comes with a precise timestamp, transaction hash, and a preview of the encrypted file. This information, which she believed to be absolutely confidential, is now being clearly presented to thousands of the world's top experts, to media reporters, and countless online viewers through a global live broadcast. "No, turn it off. Turn it off now." Su Wanqing screamed shrilly as she lunged at the control panel, frantically pounding on the keyboard in an attempt to cut off the signal. But it was all too late. The audience erupted in chaos. Gasps of shock, and angry questions mingled together. Flashbulbs went off wildly, focusing on Su Wanqing's face, which had turned deathly pale. The chat history on the big screen continued to scroll, and then several more photos popped up. One photo shows her and Lin Chuxiao embracing intimately at the airport, taken on the afternoon she left Guyan on the operating table. One of the charts shows the flow of funds in her overseas accounts, clearly indicating that huge sums of money were transferred into a shell company under Lin Chuxiao's name. The last image was a fragment of a medical assessment report bearing familiar handwriting. The subject of the assessment was clearly written as Guyan's younger sister. And the conclusion section contained the cold, hard words, medical malpractice. Su Wanqing, explain yourself. God, is this true? Dr. Su. These accusations. Cut off the live stream. Cut it off now. The venue was completely out of control. The organizers were in a panic, trying to cut off the live stream. But all the switching buttons were malfunctioning. The big screen seemed to be completely controlled by some force, ruthlessly displaying another side of Su Wanqing that no one knew. Su Wanqing stood frozen in place, as if her spine had been ripped out. She looked at her colleagues below the stage, who had once revered her like gods, now staring at her with eyes that looked at trash. She stared at the photos of herself and Lin Chuxiao on the big screen, not at the shocking words medical malpractice, her ears ringing, the world seeming to spin and collapse. Guyan even found out about this. He knew about his sister a long time ago. He's been waiting for her to be utterly disgraced in front of the whole world. Su Wanqing let out a scream that sounded inhuman, grabbed a water glass from the control panel, and smashed it hard against the big screen. Bang! The water glass shattered, and the large screen shook, but the image remained clear. The scrolling text, seemingly mocking, continued to relentlessly recount her crimes. Just then, a voice suddenly cut in from the live stream. It wasn't Su Wanqing's, nor anyone else's. It was a processed, cold, and steady male voice that clearly transmitted to every corner of the venue through the high-end sound system. The live surgery broadcast was immediately terminated due to issues with the surgeon's qualifications. Detailed evidence regarding Ms. Su Wanqing's alleged academic fraud, commercial bribery, and serious medical malpractice has been simultaneously sent to the International Medical Ethics Committee and relevant judicial authorities. The truth must not be tarnished. The male voice paused for a moment, seemingly glancing at Su Wanqing through the screen. Also, a reminder to Ms. Su Wanqing. The MX-7 monitoring device implanted in your body has 72 hours of battery life remaining. Its location tracking function is always on. Have a good escape. Drop. The signal was cut off. The large screen went black instantly, leaving only the organizer's logo flashing forlornly. The venue was deathly silent for a few seconds, then erupted into an even louder uproar. Reporters swarmed towards Su Wanqing like madmen, and security personnel had to form a human wall to block them. Su Wanqing seemed not to hear or see anything. She stood there blankly, letting the chaos engulf her. Guyan's last words were like a poisoned dagger, precisely piercing her last shred of hope. MX-7, 72-hour battery life. Location services enabled. He not only wanted to ruin her reputation, but also to turn her into a caged beast under constant surveillance. He even reminded her, run. Run? Where can she run to? Guyan's influence has reached global live broadcasts, international medical ethics committees, and judicial institutions. Is there any place for her in this world anymore? She slowly lowered her head, looking at her abdomen. There, a hasty stitching had just been performed, and thick bandages were still wrapped around it. And beneath that layer of flesh, the little thing she had personally implanted into Guyan's body was now like a loyal spy, reporting everything to its owner. A metallic taste rose in her throat, and Su Wanqing suddenly spat out a mouthful of blood, which splattered onto the control panel, a shocking sight. Her legs gave way, and she collapsed to the ground. In the last moment before darkness fell, she seemed to see again Guyan's cold, emotionless eyes on the operating table. Those eyes seemed to be projected onto the black screen, coldly watching her fall into the abyss. Outside the venue, a black sedan sat quietly on the street corner. Guyan leaned back in his seat, the wound in his abdomen still throbbing, but his eyes remained calm and undisturbed. He looked at the restless crowd in the conference center. "This is just the beginning," he muttered, then ordered the driver to the prison. It was time to visit the former colleague who had been framed by Su Wanqing. It was time to bring in the real witness. The car silently glided into traffic. Inside and outside the conference center, the shockwaves from the fall of the surgical sage were only just beginning to spread across the world. Meanwhile, Su Wanqing's nightmare, fueled by the miniature device operating within her body, was about to enter an even more desperate new phase. Su Wanqing woke up amidst a violent coughing fit. "My throat felt like it was stuffed with a wad of water-soaked cotton, and every breath tasted of blood and rust. My vision blurred at first, then slowly focused. What came into view was not the operating room lights, but the stark white ceiling of a regular hospital ward and the slow dripping of liquid from the foredrip. She moved her fingers and a tearing pain shot through her abdominal wound, sharper and more real than the 7 hours of agonizing torture. She instinctively touched her abdomen, and through the hospital gown, she could feel the thick gauze and the cold presence beneath it, the MX-7 monitor. Guyan's eyes were embedded inside her, relentlessly sending signals outwards. Thinking of this, Su Wanqing trembled and tried to sit up, but was held back by the foretubing and ECG monitor wires. "Don't move." A strange female voice came from beside the bed. Su Wanqing turned her head and saw a middle-aged woman in a nurse's uniform and a mask sitting there, holding a medical record folder in her hand, her eyes calm to the point of being indifferent. "Who are you? Where's this?" Su Wanqing's voice was hoarse and dry, as if she hadn't drunk water in a long time. "Municipal Hospital. General Surgery Ward." The nurse answered casually, turning a page of the medical record. "You collapsed in the conference center and were brought here. Mr. Gu instructed that you be given a private room. Quiet and undisturbed." "Mr. Gu." Those two words were like a needle, piercing Su Wanqing's temple. She suddenly realized that this wasn't concern, it was house arrest. In this hospital room, even suicide might be a luxury for her. "I need to see Guyan," Su Wanqing said through gritted teeth, trying to use her usual authority to mask her inner panic. The nurse lifted her eyelids and glanced at her eyes showing no respect, only a barely perceptible hint of mockery. "Mr. Gu is busy. He said if you wake up, you can rest well. Also he asked me to tell you something. Don't rush to die. The real show has just begun." Su Wanqing's heart clenched. A good show? Her life was already ruined, her reputation tarnished, her accounts frozen, everyone turning against her. Wasn't that enough for him? "About my sister?" Su Wanqing asked tentatively, a slight tremor in her voice. This was her greatest weakness, and her deepest secret. The nurse paused, closed the medical record folder, and her gaze finally sharpened. "Mr. Gu will naturally handle Miss Gu's matter. As for you..." She paused, seemingly choosing her words carefully. "Mr. Gu said that back then to cover up a failed surgery of yours that you deliberately falsified data and framed the then assistant, who is now Director Zhang. Director Zhang has held this grudge for 3 years. Mr. Gu is merely giving him a chance to seek justice. Director Zhang, that good-for-nothing who was forced out by her and only managed to stay in a marginal position at the hospital thanks to Guyan's connections. Guyan actually managed to win him over too." Su Wanqing felt a wave of dizziness. She had always thought Guyan was just a hacker hiding behind the scenes, but she never expected that his tentacles had already reached out to everyone around her, silently weaving a net waiting for her to walk into it. "No, impossible. Zhang Ming, that coward, how dare he?" Su Wanqing murmured to herself, her eyes filled with disbelief. "Coward?" The nurse chuckled at the sound, particularly jarring in the quiet ward. "Su Wanqing, do you still think you're so superior? Zhang Ming has the recording of you forging surgical records, the bank transfer records of you receiving kickbacks from pharmaceutical representatives, and the surveillance video of you deliberately tampering with competitors' reagents to secure projects. Mr. Gu has already compiled these materials and submitted them to the hospital's disciplinary committee and the medical association. Do you think he still needs to dare to do anything?" Every word was like a heavy hammer blow shattering Su Wanqing's last shred of hope. Guyan not only ruined her, but also wanted to trample her into the mud, ensuring she could never rise again. Just then, there was a gentle knock on the ward door. The nurse stood up, went over, and opened the door. Standing outside was neither the doctor nor Gu Yan, but the person Su Wanqing least wanted to see, Lin Chuxia. Lin Chuxia was dressed in an exquisite Chanel suit today, her makeup flawless, carrying an expensive Hermes bag, her face radiating the undisguised superiority of a victor. When she saw Su Wanqing wake up, the mocking smile curled at the corner of her lips. "Oh, that you're awake? Looks like Gu Yan's subordinates are quite good at taking care of people." Lin Chuxiao walked straight in, as if she were back in her own home, pulled up a chair, sat down next to Su Wanqing's bed, and crossed her legs. Su Wanqing stared intently at Lin Chuxiao, her eyes blazing with fury. It was you who colluded with Gu Yan to plot against me." "Collusion?" Lin Chuxia chuckled, covering her mouth as if she'd heard the funniest joke. "Su Wanqing, that you overestimate yourself. Me and Gu Yan? At most that we were, each getting what we needed. I needed money to leave this hellhole, and he needed proof that you'd completely disappeared. There was no collusion between us. It was just a fair trade." "A deal?" Su Wanqing's voice trembled with anger. "What do you have to offer him in a deal? You're nothing but a dog I keep." Slap. Lin Chuxia slapped Su Wanqing hard across the face with her backhand. The slap was delivered with full force, causing Su Wanqing to turn her head to the side, her cheek instantly swelling and turning red, and a metallic taste rising in her mouth once again. "A dog?" Lin Chuxia leaned close to Su Wanqing's ear, her voice low but piercing. "Su Wanqing, that you're not even worthy to carry my shoes now. What I traded with Gu Yan was you. Why do you think Gu Yan knew the details of your overseas accounts? Why did he know your shady secrets? Because I told him. Every time you bragged to me about your achievements, I recorded it. Every time you asked me to handle your dirty money, I kept a backup. You think I'm naive? I just needed an opportunity to sell you to someone who could afford it. And Gu Yan, that he can afford the entire Su group." Su Wanqing was struck dumb, frozen in place. She had always believed that Lin Chuxia loved her, or at least depended on her. She had treated Lin Chuxia as a solace in her dreary marriage, the confidant with whom she could share secrets. It turned out that from beginning to end, she had only been a piece of meat in Lin Chuxia's eyes, a bargaining chip that could be cashed in at any time. "You bitch." Su Wanqing squeezed out the words through gritted teeth, tears streaming uncontrollably down her face. Not from the pain, but from the despair of being betrayed by the person she trusted most. "Go ahead and curse as much as you want." Lin Chuxiao leisurely enjoyed Su Wanqing's breakdown. She took out a tablet from her bag, opened a video, and handed it to Su Wanqing. "Here, take a look at this. Gu Yan asked me to give this to you. He said it's a farewell gift." In the video was Gu Yan. He sat behind a large desk with the Zero Organization headquarters building, the one she'd only ever seen in financial news, as the backdrop. His face was still somewhat paled, but he seemed to be in good spirits. The bandage on his abdomen was faintly visible. He didn't look at the camera, but instead looked down at a document, his voice calm and even. "Su Wanqing, by the time you see this video, Lin Chuxia should have already received her reward and left. You must hate her, right? Hate her betrayal, hate her greed. But have you ever considered why she betrayed you? Because you've never truly trusted anyone, including her. You treated her like a plaything, and naturally, she treated you like prey. As for why I went to such lengths. For 7 hours, I lay on the operating table, listening to your flirtatious conversations on the phone, feeling the cold instruments churning inside me. At that moment, I understood that the so-called marital bond, in your eyes, was nothing more than a resource to be exploited. Since that's the case, why should I show mercy? Your arrogance, your greed, the crimes you committed against your sister, all of this comes at a price. Lin Chuxia was merely the catalyst. The real executioner is your own foolishness. Finally, a reminder. The MX-7's battery has 48 hours left. Enjoy your last moments of freedom. The video abruptly ended. Su Wanqing lay paralyzed on the hospital bed, like an empty shell devoid of her soul. Gu Yan's words and Lin Chuxia's betrayal were like two dull knives repeatedly cutting into her already shattered heart. She finally understood that Gu Yan didn't want her life, but rather to watch as everything she possessed, reputation, wealth, love, and family, vanished bit by bit because of her arrogance and greed. Freedom? Su Wanqing laughed bitterly, tears mingling with blood at the corner of her mouth as they streamed down her face. "I've lost my freedom. From the moment he lay on the operating table, that I've lost my freedom. Lin Chuxiao stood up, elegantly straightened her skirt, and looked down at Su Wanqing. All right, that the show's over. I should go now. Gu Yin said you should reflect on your actions in this hospital room. As for the Su Group, he's about to hold a press conference to officially announce the acquisition. You can just listen to the live broadcast here. Consider it a, well, not so perfect ending to your once glorious life. After Lin Chuxiao finished speaking, she turned and left. The sound of her high heels hitting the ground echoed in the ward. One after another, like the tolling of Su Wanqing's death knell. Reaching the door, Lin Chuxiao seemed to remember something. Stopped and turned back to add, alright, I forgot to tell you, I helped you remember the password to your overseas account and gave it to Gu Yan. You were drunk then, and you hugged me, saying it was your savings for your funeral. What a pity. Now it belongs to Gu Yan. Goodbye. Su Wanqing. No. Perhaps it's goodbye forever. The door clicked shut. The ward fell silent once more. Only the monotonous beeping of the cardiac monitor remained, like the countdown to life's end. Su Wanqing lay motionless on the bed. She didn't cry out, nor did she struggle. She simply stared intently at the ceiling, her once bright and confident eyes now only filled with a lifeless emptiness. She recalled her glory standing on the operating table, her authority in reprimanding her subordinates, her indifference when lying next to Gu Yan, and her resolute decision to abandon him and rush to the airport. Scene after scene flashed through her mind like a revolving lantern. It turns out it was all a joke. She was the one who was placed on the operating table, cut up and mocked by everyone. After an unknown amount of time, the television news in the ward suddenly interrupted with an urgent message. Breaking news from this station: the internationally renowned investment group, Beyond Capital, held a press conference today announcing the completion of its full takeover bid for Su's Medical Group, acquiring a 78% stake and becoming its controlling shareholder. Mr. Gu Yan, the actual controller of Beyond Capital, stated that the group will comprehensively overhaul its internal management, thoroughly investigate any past violations, and hold those responsible legally accountable. Simultaneously, Mr. Gu Yan personally announced the establishment of the Gu Yan Medical Ethics Foundation to commemorate his sister, who tragically passed away due to a medical malpractice incident, with an initial donation of $3 billion. $3 billion. It was her missing $3 billion. As Su Wanqing listened to the news anchor's impassioned voice, Gu Yan's calm and collected remarks, and the name Gu Yan, she finally let out a suppressed sob like a dying wild beast. She slowly raised her hand, trembling as she touched the bandage on her abdomen, and then the cold MX7 monitor. Gu Yan, Gu Yan. She repeated the name over and over, her voice filled with endless regret, feared, and a twisted love that she herself was unaware of. She knew Gu Yan wasn't lying to her. This was indeed the beginning of a good show. She has even been deprived of the right to take her final bow. Outside the ward, at the end of the corridor, Gu Yan leaned against the window, holding a tablet computer in his hand. The screen displayed live surveillance footage of Su Wanqing's ward. He looked at the woman curled up on the bed, shivering. In the video, his eyes filled with no pity, only an unfathomable coldness. He turned off the screen and turned to leave. He informed Zhang Ming, who whispered into his headset, that he could begin his statement. He also instructed Zhang Ming to anonymously send the evidence of Su Wanqing's falsification of medical records to the remaining members of the Su family who were still observing. It was time to make them choose sides. Yes, sir. The sound of footsteps echoed in the empty corridor, gradually fading into the distance. Inside the ward, Su Wanqing's sobs gradually subsided, eventually fading into deathly silence. Only the television continued to broadcast the news of Gu Yan's acquisition of the Su Group, along with the glaring name of the foundation, Gu Yan. That was the cruelest punishment for her, and a nightmare she could never escape. Su Wanqing stayed in the hospital bed for 2 days. For the past 2 days, no one has come to see her. The nurse wearing a mask appears on time every day to change her dressings and take her temperature. Her movements mechanical and precise, like maintaining a broken-down machine. The television has been taken away, her phone has been confiscated, and her only way of sensing the outside world is through the occasional whispers coming from the corridor and the nurse's expressionless face. She tried pulling out the four-line, tried slashing her wrists with the sharp metal brace of the bedside, but each time a nurse would appear in front of her within 30 seconds, professionally subdue her, and then inject her with a sedative, letting her sink into a state of confusion. She even suspected that her hormone levels were being monitored by MX7, and that it would automatically trigger an alarm if suicidal tendencies were detected. Nguyen turned her into an insect trapped in a transparent jar, keeping her alive, but depriving her of all dignity and the right to choose. On the morning of the third day, when the nurse came in to change the dressing, she unusually said something extra. "Mr. Gu wants you to see this." She handed me a tablet. Su Wanxing sat up abruptly, the movement aggravating her wound and causing her to gasp in pain, but her eyes remained fixed on the screen. The screen didn't display Nguyen's face, nor any graphic depiction of punishment, but rather an extremely complex financial trading interface. The interface was divided into several windows. The top left corner displayed a real-time chart of the global foreign exchange market. At the bottom right corner showed the internal system interface of the Swiss private bank that Su Wanxing was extremely familiar with. And in the center, a series of rapidly scrolling codes and transaction data were displayed. "This is," Su Wanxing's voice dry and hoarse. "Your money," the nurse said succinctly, tapping the screen lightly with her finger. The data flow in the central window suddenly accelerated. Su Wanxing recognized it. It was the flow of funds she had hidden in various offshore accounts. Those numbers she thought were impregnable were now disappearing from more than a dozen different accounts like a receding tide, converging into several thick data streams and pouring into an account labeled Nguyen Foundation. $3 billion US. That was the culmination of her life's work, the sole motivation for her betrayal of Nguyen, her marriage, and even her conscience. Now it was slipping out of her control and flowing into Nguyen's name at a speed and in a way she could never comprehend. "No, stop now." Su Wanxing frantically tried to snatch the tablet, but the nurse easily dodged to the side, held the tablet up to her face, and forced her to look at it. "Look closely." Su Wanxing. The nurse's voice remained calm, but yet carried a chilling, penetrating force. "This wasn't robbery, it was recycling. Mr. Gu said this money was tainted and needed to be cleansed through charity. The Nguyen Foundation would donate this money to the patients harmed by your substandard medical supplies, to the young doctors whose work you plagiarized, and to the families who lost loved ones due to medical malpractice." Nguyen. Nguyen. Su Wanxing murmured the name, her heart aching. Using her sister's name to wash away her sins. How ironic and cruel. On the screen, the funds transfer entered its final stage. A final confirmation box popped up on the Swiss bank's interface. Transfer complete. Balance, $0. Midnight. At this moment, Su Wanxing's world was completely reset to zero. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Only a hoarse, bellowing sound came from her throat. She watched helplessly as the number representing her entire fortune turned to zero, and as the balance of the Nguyen Foundation grew to an astronomical figure. Then the screen flashed and switched to a live news broadcast. In the news report, Nguyen was standing in a magnificent press conference venue surrounded by several highly respected medical luminaries. He wore a well-tailored dark suit, appearing even more upright and composed than she remembered. Facing the countless flashing lights below the stage, his expression was calm and solemn. "The initial funding from the Nguyen Medical Ethics Foundation will be used to support medical malpractice investigations and victim assistance worldwide. We promise that every penny will be used wisely to uncover the truth and bring solace to the deceased." Nguyen's voice came through the tablet clearly, deep and magnetic, perfectly matching his current identity. A philanthropist controlling vast amounts of capital. The camera panned across the audience, and Su Wanxing saw many familiar faces. The hospital leaders who had once bowed and scraped before her, the experts who had eagerly sought to take photos with her at academic conferences, and even several uncles from collateral branches of the Su family. They were all sitting in the guest seats, their faces showing just the right amount of emotion and admiration, applauding enthusiastically. Not a single person glanced in her direction. Su Wanxing suddenly laughed, a shrill and manic laugh that aggravated her wounds, causing her to curl up in pain. She laughed at Gu Yan's ruthlessness, at her own foolishness, and at the coldness of the world. The empire she had built over more than a decade had been overthrown by Gu Yan in just 1 month, who then packaged himself as a compassionate savior. He won. He won completely. Su Wanqing coughed up blood, her eyes unfocused. The nurse put away the tablet, seemingly having completed her task, and turned to leave. Wait. Su Wanqing shouted at her with all her might, tell me, how was that 3 billion transferred away? The bank's security system. She couldn't understand it. Swiss banks have world-class secrecy and security systems. Even if Gu Yan had extraordinary abilities, it was impossible for him to silently break through layers of security and transfer money without triggering any alarms. Unless he had the authority from the beginning. The nurse stopped, turned around, and a flicker of pity crossed her eyes above her mask. But it vanished quickly. Mr. Gu said you would ask this question. He told me to tell you authority? Do you really think that dynamic token you used to log into the banking system was issued by a Swiss bank? Dynamic token? Su Wanqing's pupils suddenly contracted. She suddenly remembered that 3 years ago, when she opened this account, that she had indeed received a package containing a well-made dynamic token. At the time, she assumed it was standard equipment from the bank and never suspected anything. Could it be that token was something Gu Yan had tampered with from the very beginning? Had he hacked into the bank's system and replaced the token? Or had he actually controlled the bank's internal network? In making the account balance, she saw an illusion all along. No doubt impossible. I personally went to Zurich to set that up. Su Wanqing muttered to herself, but her confidence waned. She remembered what Gu Yan had said in the video. Your arrogance is your grave. She had always thought she was in control, but little did she know that she was the one being kept in the dark. Whether it's an illusion or not, see for yourself. The nurse turned on the tablet again and brought up a code log. Logs show that over the past 3 years, every time Su Wanqing logged into the bank system, checked her balance, or even made a small test transfer, her commands were redirected to a mirror server controlled by Gu Yan. The account information and transaction records she saw were all part of a script Gu Yan had shown her. The actual control of the account had been transferred to a trust fund designated by Gu Yan the moment she set it up 3 years ago. In other words, that $3 billion never truly belonged to her. It had been lying quietly in Gu Yan's pocket, waiting for today, waiting for her to completely lose her value before taking it out to deliver a fatal blow. Su Wanqing completely broke down. She frantically scratched her face, tore at her hospital gown, and howled like a wild beast. It turned out that Gu Yan hadn't taken her assets. She had been guarding them for him from beginning to end. Like a clown, she had sold her soul and betrayed her family for a number that didn't belong to her, ultimately ending up isolated and abandoned by everyone. Gu Yan, come out here. You devil. You will die a horrible death. She screamed, her voice echoing in the empty hospital room. The nurse watched her have an attack indifferently until she was exhausted and collapsed on the bed, her chest heaving violently and her breathing coming out like a broken bellows. Mr. Gu also said that when the nurse spoke again, her voice was completely flat. The MX-7 still had 24 hours of battery life left. It recorded all of your self-harming behavior and mental state. This data will be submitted as evidence of your unstable mental state in subsequent legal proceedings. Furthermore, Director Zhang Ming's formal complaint was submitted to the Procuratorate this morning. The charges include major medical malpractice, embezzlement, and bribery, damage to business reputation, enough to sentence you to many years. Zhang Ming reported. Su Wanqing closed her eyes in despair. Gu Yan's net had tightened too much. He not only wanted her money, but also her life, to spend the rest of her life in prison, and to completely negate everything about her under the law. He wants me dead, Su Wanqing murmured. No, the nurse corrected. Mr. Gu said. Death would be too easy for you. He wants you to live consciously, to watch you destroy everything with your own hands, to watch your sister's name be used for charity, to watch everything you once owned be branded with someone else's mark. Living is more painful than dying, isn't it? After the nurse finished speaking, she turned and left without lingering. The ward door closed softly with a click, like the sound of a lock being put on. Su Wanqing lay alone on the hospital bed, surrounded by deathly silence. The MX-7 monitor in her abdomen seemed to sense her violent heartbeat and despair, emitting extremely weak, regular pulse signals that like a cold eye blinking in the darkness. 24 hours. She has only 24 hours left before she's taken to court and thrown in jail. Guyan. Meanwhile, will be outside the courtroom, watching it all unfold with a smile. Note, this can't be. This absolutely can't be. A powerful will to survive that mixed with a deep-seated hatred for Gu Yin that ignited from the depths of Su Wanqing's crumbling soul. She couldn't give up like this. Wasn't Gu Yin omnipotent? Didn't he control everything? Then he must have a weakness. She suddenly remembered something: Lin Chuxia. Lin Chuxia had taken her money and made a deal with Gu Yin. But would someone like Lin Chuxia genuinely cooperate with Gu Yin? She must have a backup plan. Perhaps she could find a breakthrough through Lin Chuxia. Su Wanqing struggled to her feet, pulled the 4 needle from the back of her hand, and blood gushed out immediately. Ignoring the pain, she stumbled to the window. The ward was on the 3rd floor. Jumping would be certain death, but there was an old sewer pipe outside the window. She gritted her teeth, pushed open the window, and leaned out. A cold wind rushed in, scattering the tear stains and bloodstains on her face. She gripped the icy water pipe and inching her way down. Her abdominal wound was ripped open, blood soaking her hospital gown, but she felt no pain. Only one thought occupied her mind: escape, find Lin Chuxia, and take revenge on Gu Yin. The moment her feet touched the ground, the screen of the tablet computer she had tossed onto the bed in the ward behind her suddenly lit up automatically. On the screen, Gu Yan's calm face reappeared. He seemed to have anticipated her escape, a faint, knowing smile playing on his lips. So that you still chose this path? Gu Yan's voice came from the tablet, tinged with a sigh, yet chillingly cold. Then let me show you what it truly means to trap someone like a turtle in a jar. The screen switches to display a satellite map. On the map, a red that is slowly moving from the hospital building, along the sewer pipes, down to the ground, and then stumbling towards the hospital's back door. Next to the red clear biological data is displayed. Heart rate 187. Blood oxygen saturation 82%. Estimated blood loss 300 milliliters. Su Wanqing ran through the cold wind, her lungs feeling like they were about to burst. Unbeknownst to her, the MX-7 within her was acting like a loyal beacon, transmitting her location and vital signs flawlessly to Gu Yin, who was not far away, and to those already waiting at the crossroads, those waiting to receive her. She thought she was fighting like a cornered beast, but little did she know that from the moment she decided to escape, she had already stepped into the next, even more desperate cage that Gu Yin had prepared for her. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, Gu Yin put down his tablet and stared at the red on the screen that represented Su Wanqing, his eyes deep and unfathomable. Pass the order, he said softly to the air, his voice devoid of any emotion. Close the net. Don't let her die. The prison needs one more important guest. Yes, sir. Outside the window, night deepened. A silent hunt for the downtrodden was unfolding. Su Wanqing's escape was doomed from the start. The last straw she desperately clung to was precisely the final weight that broke her. Cold. Bone-chilling cold. Su Wanqing walked barefoot in the alleyway covered with gravel. The cold wind whistled through her thin hospital gown, a cotton robe that Gu Yin had prepared for her, offering no warmth whatsoever. The wound on her abdomen had been torn open completely while climbing the sewer pipes, and every breath carried a strong smell of blood. Warm liquid trickled down her inner thighs, soaking the fabric, which quickly turned icy cold in the wind. But she can't stop. Behind her, the lone lamp in the window of the 3rd-floor hospital room, like Gu Yan's eyes, coldly watched her disheveled state. She knew that MX-7 was frantically sending signals out: location, heart rate, blood oxygen, blood loss. All her physiological data was probably being clearly displayed on Gu Yan's screen in the form of charts. This feeling of being constantly watched was more terrifying than death itself. She had to find Chuxia. She gritted her teeth, her gums trembling from the cold and blood lost, making a gurgling sound. Lin Chuxia was her only chance. That woman was insatiable. Since she could get money from Gu Yin, she certainly wouldn't put all her eggs in one basket. She must have a backup plan, hiding secrets that Gu Yin didn't know. As long as she found her obtained evidence, even just a few words, but she could blackmail Guyen at least by a way out. She stumbled along clinging to the damp walls as she navigated the maze-like alleyways. The city wasn't completely asleep in the early morning. The occasional roar of a truck echoed in the distance, while the rustling of stray cats foraging nearby filled the air. Each sound sent a chill down her spine. She felt as if a hand would reach out from the darkness and drag her into an even deeper abyss. After walking for an unknown amount of time, as she finally found her way to the address Lin Chuxia had mentioned before leaving, an old apartment building in the suburbs. The stairwell reeked of mildew and urine, and the motion-activated lights were outdated. With each step she took, the darkness deepened. Relying on her memory, she found a room on the top floor. The door was ajar. Su Wanqing's heart leaped into her throat. She held her breath, listening intently. She could faintly hear the sound of television news, a report about Guyan's acquisition of the Su Group and the establishment of a foundation. She gently pushed open the door. The room was dimly lit, with only the flickering light from the television screen. Early summer? She called tentatively, her voice terribly hoarse. No one responded. She shuffled in, supporting herself against the wall. The living room was a mess. Expensive handbags were carelessly tossed on the floor, and clothes were scattered everywhere, as if a hurried search had taken place. On the television, the presenter was passionately reading that the Guyan Foundation's initial donation is a staggering $3 billion. Mr. Guyan stated that this will be a continuous global medical aid project. Su Wanqing's gaze swept across the screen, and Guyan's calm face made her nauseous. She forced back her nausea and continued walking inside. The bedroom door was tightly shut. Her hands trembled as she turned the doorknob. Click! The door opened. A strong smell of blood wafted over. Su Wanqing's pupils suddenly contracted. In the bedroom, Lin Chuxiao lay on her back on the floor, her eyes wide open, dead. A telephone cord was wrapped tightly around her neck, digging deep into her flesh. Her tongue lolled out, and her face was bluish-purple. Blood spread from beneath her, staining the expensive carpet red. Beside her stiff fingers lay a cell phone with a shattered screen, the screen still frozen on an unsent text message draft. Guyan is 0. He didn't give me money. He's trying to kill me. Come quick. Su Wanqing was struck dumb, frozen in place, unable to even scream. Lin Chuxiao was dead? Murdered? Who was the murderer? Guyan? No. If Guyan wanted to kill Lin Chuxiao, why would he use such a clumsy method? He has countless ways to make someone disappear silently. This is more like silencing her. Or framing her. She suddenly remembered what Guyan had said in the video. Don't rush to die, the show has only just begun. Could this show also include making her a murder suspect? Just then, heavy footsteps sounded at the door. Not one person, but many. The footsteps were steady and orderly, not the hurried pace of police officers, but more like those of professionally trained security personnel. Su Wanqing turned around in alarm, only to see that the doorway was now filled with men in black, their faces expressionless and their eyes cold, completely blocking the exit. Between these men, Guyan slowly walked in. He had changed into a dark gray loungewear set, with a long black trench coat draped over it. Compared to his glamorous appearance at the press conference, he looked much more somber now. He wasn't holding anything. He simply stared calmly at Su Wanqing and Lin Chuxiao's corpse on the ground, his eyes showing no surprise, as if he had expected all of this. They arrived earlier than I expected. Guyan spoke, his voice echoing in the empty room, revealing neither joy nor anger. Su Wanqing trembled all over, pointing at Lin Chuxiao on the ground, stammering incoherently. No, it wasn't me, I didn't kill her, It was you, you killed her, didn't you? You're trying to frame me. Guyan did not answer her question. Instead, he slowly walked to Lin Chuxiao's body, squatted down, carefully examined the ligature marks on her neck, and then looked through the shattered phone. The phone cord indicated strangulation, with clear signs of struggle, suggesting death occurred between half an hour and an hour prior. Guyan spoke as if conducting a pathological analysis, his tone eerily calm. The phone was shattered, but its internal memory chip had been removed with professional skill. It seemed someone didn't want us to see its contents. He raised his head, his gaze piercing as he looked at Su Wanqing. and you on the run that happened to stumble upon the crime scene, still bearing the injuries from escaping from the hospital. Su Wanqing. In court. Who do you think the jury will believe? Su Wanqing's heart sank to the bottom. Gu Yan was right. All the evidence pointed to her. She was at the crime scene. If she had a motive, if she had the evidence to, and the missing chip from Lin Chuxia's phone could be interpreted as her destroying evidence. Gu Yan didn't need to kill her. He only needed to lure her here and make her the protagonist of this tragedy. It was you. It was all your design. Su Wanqing retreated in despair until her back hit the cold wall, with nowhere left to go. Design? Gu Yan stood up, brushed off non-existent dust from his hands, and approached Su Wanqing step by step. Su Wanqing. You overestimate yourself. Lin Chuxia's death has nothing to do with me. But your appearance certainly makes this play more perfect. He paused, his gaze sweeping over the bandage on Su Wanqing's abdomen. MX7's records showed you entered this room at 11:17 p.m., before Lin Chuxia's time of death. You're not the murderer, but you are the perfect scapegoat. Guiding you here was simply to ensure you were in the right place at the right time. He snapped his fingers. A man in black stepped forward and handed Gu Yan a tablet computer. Gu Yan swiped the screen and pulled up a surveillance video. The footage was from a blind spot in the hospital corridor, but the angle was tricky, perfectly capturing the entire process of Su Wanqing climbing down the sewer pipe, crystal clear. High-definition cameras have long covered every corner of the hospital. Gu Yan said calmly, including the one in your ward. You think you're fighting like a cornered beast, but actually you're just completing your final run on the track I set. Watching the disheveled figure fleeing in the video, Su Wanqing finally understood. From the moment she pulled out the 4. Gu Yan had been watching her. He had calculated that she would go to Lin Chuxia, that she would break into this haunted house, and that she would become a suspect in this murder case. He didn't need to do it himself. He only needed to exploit human greed, fear, and despair to push her into an abyss of no return. Why? Su Wanqing's voice was hoarse, trembling with sobs. Gu Yan, even if I was wrong, why did you have to go this far? Why? Gu Yan repeated these two words, his eyes suddenly turning icy cold, a look Su Wanqing had never seen before, filled with endless hatred. Because of those 7 hours. Because of that surgery you used for practice. Because you didn't even flinch when you signed medical malpractice on my sister's medical record. Because of your arrogance when you said he had nothing else besides this face and that bit of code. He took a step forward, almost touching Su Wanqing's face, his voice low but piercing. Su Wanqing, this isn't revenge, this is reckoning. You owe me, you owe my sister, you owe those lives you ruined. I'll make you pay for it with your whole life. Prison is the best place for you. There you can slowly reflect on how you climbed from the clouds, step by step, to this end I've prepared for you today. After speaking, Gu Yan straightened up and no longer glancing at Su Wanqing, and ordered the men in black beside him. Take them away. Clean up the scene. Call the police in 10 minutes. Remember to leave Su Wanqing's fingerprints on that phone line. Yes, sir. The man in black stepped forward and roughly dragged the limp Su Wanqing up like a piece of trash. Su Wanqing had no strength to resist. She was like a soulless doll, completely at his mercy. As she was being dragged out the door, she took one last look at Lin Chuxia's unseeing eyes on the ground, and then at Gu Yan's indifferent back. She finally realized that what Gu Yan wanted was not just her disgrace and ruin, not just the loss of her wealth, but the destruction of her character, her complete death in a social sense. He wanted her to live, to rot and stink in the gutter of prison, in endless regret and fear. The moment she was dragged out of the apartment building, the icy air filled her lungs, and Su Wanqing let out a mournful wail that sounded inhuman. The sound was carried away by the night wind and disappeared into the vast darkness, unheard by anyone. Gu Yan stood there, watching the men in black drag Su Wanqing away, his gaze fixed on Lin Chuxia's corpse on the ground, his eyes as deep and unfathomable as a still pool. He took out his phone, dialed the number, and said calmly, Plan B complete. Notify the procuratorate that they can intervene ahead of schedule. Also, anonymously send the recovered data from Lin Chuxia's phone chip to the Criminal Investigation Division. Remembered, only send the parts that prove Su Wanqing committed the crime. He hung up the phone, took one last look at the room filled with bloodshed and conspiracy, and turned to leave. The hem of his trench coat drew a cold arc in the air that like the scythe of death. Su Wanqing's escape ended in falling into an even deeper trap, and her dark and hopeless prison life had only just begun. Gu Yan's game was meticulously planned, at each step intricately linked, until he had driven his opponent into a corner, leaving no chance of a comeback. This was his so-called reckoning, a carefully orchestrated and ruthless destruction. In the detention center's visiting room, the cold, incandescent light cast a stark white glow devoid of any shadows. The air was thick with the mingled smells of disinfectant and despair. Su Wanqing sat at the stainless steel table and chairs in the visiting room, her hands and feet bound by heavy shackles that rattled loudly with each movement. In just a few days, she looked 10 years older. Her eyes were sunken, her cheekbones prominent, and her once jet-black hair was now dried, frizzy and streaked with noticeable gray. She had changed from a hospital gown to rough prison clothes, which only accentuated her emaciated appearance. She is suspected of multiple crimes, including intentional homicide, major medical malpractice, embezzlement, and misappropriation of funds, and has been formally arrested. Public opinion has already condemned her, turning her from a once renowned surgical expert into a murderous doctor hated by everyone. In the detention center, even other detainees look at her with contempt and disgust. The iron gate swung open with a clang, and Gu Yan walked in. He was dressed in a well-tailored dark suit today, his gleaming leather shoes clicking crisply on the concrete. Compared to Su Wanqing's disheveled state, he appeared remarkably composed, impeccably groomed, and even possessed a chilling elegance. He held a thin folder in his hand, sat down opposite Su Wanqing, placed the folder on the table, but did not open it. Su Wanqing raised her cloudy eyes and looked at Gu Yan. The hatred and despair she felt downstairs at the apartment building a few days ago had now settled into a numb, ashen feeling. She knew that Gu Yan hadn't come to laugh at her, but to deliver the final blow. The sentence won't be short. Gu Yan spoke, his voice steadied, as if stating an objective fact. Intentional homicide, even if ultimately deemed an attempt or given a lighter sentence that combined with other charges, would amount to at least 20 years. Considering your physical condition. His gaze swept over the bandages on Su Wanqing's abdomen. The wound there, due to inadequate care, had shown signs of infection, meaning her time on medical parole might be longer than her actual imprisonment. Su Wanqing tugged at her chapped lips and said in a hoarse voice, "You came just to tell me this?" "Not entirely." Gu Yan picked up the folder on the table and gently pushed it in front of Su Wanqing. "There are some things in here that I think you should take a look at. After all, that it would be too boring to let you die without understanding why." With trembling hands, Su Wanqing opened the folder. Inside weren't legal documents, but several photocopies. The first was an old, handwritten medical record. The paper was yellowed, and the handwriting was somewhat blurred, but the diagnosis was clearly visible. Patient. Gu Yan. Diagnosis. Perforated acute appendicitis with diffuse peritonitis. Intraoperative findings. Gangrene at the base of the appendix, severe surrounding adhesions, and accidental injury to mesenteric vessels during separation leading to massive hemorrhage. Surgeon. Su Wanqing. First assistant. Zhang Ming. Conclusion. Medical malpractice. Postoperative severe secondary. Infection resulting in permanent reproductive system damage and immune dysfunction. Su Wanqing's fingers trembled violently. This was Gu Yan's medical record. She thought this record had been destroyed long ago due to the alteration back then. She never expected that Gu Yan could find the original. Where did you find this?" She looked up at Gu Yan in horror. "Zhang Ming kept a copy." Gu Yan said calmly that he knew you would destroy the evidence, so he secretly made a copy. It was also he who discovered the evidence in the post-operative care records that you had overused antibiotics to cover up your mistake, causing Gu Yan to have a severe adverse drug reaction. Su Wanqing back, then to protect your reputation as a surgical genius, that you not only altered the medical records, but also almost killed Gu Yan. If I hadn't discovered it in time and transferred her to another hospital, she would have lost her life. Su Wanqing's face turned even paler. She remembered that surgery. Gu Yan was in excruciating pain. Exhausted from consecutive surgeries, Su Wanqing made a mistake during the procedure, causing bleeding. She panicked. To cover it up, as she altered the records, even implying to the family that the condition had progressed naturally. She thought she had done it flawlessly. The second one. Gu Yin tapped the folder, signaling her to continue reading. The second document contained a series of bank statements and encrypted communication records. These records showed that over the past 3 years that Su Wanqing had transferred funds from the Su Group overseas through multiple shell companies, totaling exactly the $3 billion. The recipient account information ultimately pointed to a trust fund opened in Lin Chuxia's name, but actually controlled by Su Wanqing. Your money has never left your control. Gu Yan's voice carried a hint of mockery. You think Lin Chuxia betrayed you and took your money? Notice she was just a puppet you put on the table. You used her to launder money to clean up the dirty money before transferring it back into your own pocket. Lin Chuxia never knew until her death that the ultimate beneficiary of the money in her account was actually you. You even plotted to kill her when she tried to embezzle some. The fingerprints extracted from the phone line in the apartment that besides Lin Chuxia's included yours. Although you had lost too much blood and your fingerprints were somewhat blurred, they were enough as circumstantial evidence. Su Wanqing was completely stunned. She stared at the transaction records, those familiar transaction paths, and Gu Yin had interpreted them in such a way. She had indeed used Lin Chuxia's account to launder money, but that was to circumvent regulations. The money ultimately returned to the trust she controlled. Yet Gu Yin was now portraying her as the mastermind. Lin Chuxia as a puppet, and even implying that she had killed Lin Chuxia to silence her. This was a complete distortion of the truth. You're framing me. Su Wanqing suddenly looked up, her eyes bloodshot. That money is mine. I only wanted to. For what? So that one day you can leave me without a care in the world. And run away with your first love? Gu Yin interrupted her, his eyes icy. Su Wanqing, your greed and selfishness have made you lose your last shred of reason. You think you've got everything under control, but you've even forgotten the time bomb you planted yourself. Lin Chuxia discovered that the true beneficiary of the trust fund is my sister's name. She thought she had something on you, but she didn't know that this was precisely the flaw you deliberately left to lower my guard. You planned everything perfectly, except that I would find Zhang Ming first and obtain evidence of your tampering with medical records, and that MX7 would record all your unspeakable secrets. He stood up, looking down at Su Wanqing as if she were an ant about to be crushed. Lin Chuxia's death was both an accident and an inevitability. She discovered too much, and wanted too much. And you became the most suitable scapegoat. All of this was caused by your own choices, your own greed, your own arrogance. I simply wanted to present the truth to the world in the way I needed it most. Su Wanqing slumped in her chair, her body ice cold. She finally understood that Gu Yin wasn't just seeking revenge. He was reconstructing the truth. He had used the foreshadowing she had planted, the mistakes she had made, and even her human weaknesses to weave a flawless web of evidence. Within this web, she was utterly defenseless, the evidence irrefutable. The third one. Gu Yin spoke again, pulling out the last sheet of paper from the bottom of the folder and gently placing it in front of Su Wanqing. It wasn't a document, but a photograph. The photograph showed a small, simple tombstone. Engraved on it were 2 words, remembrance. In front of the tombstone lay a bouquet of fresh white daisies. This is Gu Yin's home now. Gu Yan's voice lowered, carrying a hint of barely perceptible pain, but it was quickly covered by a deeper coldness. She could no longer speak, no longer laugh, no longer live like a normal person. This is all thanks to you. Su Wanqing, the law will judge your crimes, but my judgment of you will never end. Every day in prison, you can think about what you have truly destroyed. Su Wanqing stared intently at the photograph, as if she could see Gu Yin's pale face, so strikingly similar to Gu Yan's, through it. Regret, fear, despair, a torrent of emotions gnawed at her heart like venomous snakes. She opened her mouth, wanting to defend herself, wanting to repent, but found herself unable to utter a sound. All words seemed so pale and powerless before Gu Yin's small tombstone. Gu Yin stopped looking at her and turned to walk towards the door. Just as he grasped the doorknob, he stopped at his back to Su Wanqing, and uttered his final words. Oh, I forgot to tell you. The MX7 has only 3% battery left. It will stay with you until the moment you walk into prison. Then it will automatically destroy itself. but its memories will remain forever in my system. Everything about you will be a footnote to my revenge. The iron gate slammed shut, isolating the inside from the outside. In the meeting room, only Su Wanqing remained, along with the tombstone photo of Gu Nian on the table. She reached out her trembling hand, wanting to touch her sister's name in the photo, but her fingertips froze in midair. She slowly lowered her head, looking at her shackled hands. Hands that once held scalpels and saved lives, now only used to bear the cold weight of chains. She finally understood that the most vicious aspect of Gu Yan's revenge was not in depriving her of her freedom, but in making her soberly realize the sins she had committed and the irreversible consequences amidst eternal regret and pain. She lost, a complete and utter defeat. It wasn't that we lost to Gu Yan's methods, but rather to our own greed, arrogance, and indifference. She curled up on the cold chair, letting out suppressed sobs, like a wounded beast echoing for a long time in this cage with its four white walls, but no one listened. Outside the walls, Gu Yan's footsteps faded into the distance, disappearing at the end of the corridor. He had completed his purge, leaving Su Wanqing only with boundless darkness and that insurmountable tombstone named Gu Nian. The First Intermediate People's Court of the City. Criminal Trial Division. This was the coldest day since the beginning of winter. Lead gray clouds hung low over the city, seemingly foreshadowing the somber atmosphere to come in the courtroom. The courtroom was packed with people crowding the aisles. The media area was already set up with their cameras and microphones. Flashes going off intermittently, trying to capture the expressions of every key figure. In the gallery were elderly medical luminaries with white hair, former medical staff, who had trembled under Su Wanqing's care, to relatives from the Su family's collateral branches eager to sever ties, and many more citizens who had come to hear the news. Their eyes held a mixture of curiosity, indignation, and a kind of gleeful satisfaction at witnessing the fall of a deity. Everyone is waiting. Waiting for the woman who once stood at the top of the pyramid, waiting for the trial hailed as the trial of the century to begin. At 9 a.m. sharp, the bailiff captain's booming voice cut through the noise. Bring the defendant, Su Wanqing, to court. The side door opened, and the clattering sound of shackles dragging on the floor was crisp and jarring. Su Wanqing was escorted slowly into the courtroom by two burly bailiffs. Compared to the spirited surgical expert she had been just a few months ago, she looked like a completely different person. She wore a loose-fitting orange vest with the detention center's insignia. Her hair was hastily pulled back, revealing a smooth but wrinkled forehead and sunken eye sockets. Her complexion was a sickly sallow, her lips were chapped and peeling, and she walked with a limp. If the bailiffs hadn't been supporting her arms, she would have been barely able to walk. Although the wound in her abdomen had healed, long-term malnutrition and mental torment had left her emaciated, reduced to skin and bones. However, what was most unsettling were her eyes. Those once bright, confident, even arrogant eyes were now like two dry wells, lifeless and devoid of any light. She didn't look at the audience, the media, or even the judge's bench. Her gaze was blankly fixed ahead, as if all the surrounding commotion was irrelevant to her. When she was led to the dock and made to stand, the sound of the shackles striking the bars made her body tremble slightly. But she quickly returned to that deathly numbness. The presiding judge struck the gavel and announced the start of the court session. The prosecutor stood up and began reading the indictment. The reading lasted for more than half an hour, and each charge struck Su Wanqing's eardrums like a heavy hammer. The defendant, Su Wanqing, as a medical professional, abused her position to accept bribes totaling over 12 million renminbi from pharmaceutical representatives. She illegally altered medical records to cover up a major medical accident, causing severe physical and psychological harm to the patient. She embezzled and misappropriated up to $3 billion from the Su's medical group for overseas money laundering and personal extravagance, even more egregiously in the intentional homicide case. Although there are some disputes regarding the chain of evidence, the direct evidence linking her to the crime at the time is conclusive, and there is suspicion of evidence destruction. In conclusion, if the defendant Su Wanqing's crimes are cleared, the evidence is sufficient, and the social impact is extremely negative. It is recommended that the courts severely punish her. Every word was like a dull knife cutting into Su Wanqing's already broken heart. As she listened to the charges and the prosecutor's list of evidence, Gu Yan's calm, that indifferent face, kept flashing through her mind. She knew that much of this so-called evidence had been carefully crafted, even fabricated, by Gu Yan. For example, the 3 billion yuan which Gu Yan had clearly controlled long ago, that was now being used to frame her for embezzlement, and Lin Chuxia's death, which was clearly someone else's attempt to silence her, had shifted suspicion onto her. However, that she couldn't defend herself, because Gu Yan had done it too perfectly, so perfectly that even she herself felt the evidence was real. The MX-7 recording of her panicked heartbeat, the hospital surveillance footage of her climbing the pipes, the tampered chat logs on Lin Chuxia's phone. All the pieces of the puzzle were in Gu Yan's hands, piecing together a picture pointing to her crimes. The defense attorney attempted a not guilty plea, but it proved futile in the face of a barrage of irrefutable evidence presented by the prosecutor, especially when the prosecutor played the recording provided by an inside informant, in which Su Wanqing, during a break in surgery, impatiently said that once the incision was finished that he was worthless. A chorus of boos and condemnations erupted from the audience. At that moment, Su Wanqing felt a chill run to the bone. Those words were indeed hers, spoken by Gu Yan, lying on the operating table. Gu Yan had placed them here, turning them into irrefutable evidence of her contempt for life and cold-blooded ruthlessness. He didn't need to fabricate anything. He only needed to intercept them, only needed to manipulate them to nail her to the pillar of shame. The trial proceeded to the stage of presenting and examining evidence, and the climax arrived. The prosecutor submitted a crucial piece of evidence to the court, an audit report from the Gu Yan Medical Ethics Foundation, which detailed the final destination of the $3 billion embezzled by Su Wanqing. A large portion of it was used to purchase scattered shares of the Su Group, completing Gu Yan's complete control of the Su Group. This report was logically sound and data-rich, virtually eliminating all possible avenues for Su Wanqing's defense. Next up, the prosecutor played a video. The video was from the exterior surveillance footage of the apartment building where Lin Chuxia was murdered. Although blurry, it clearly showed Su Wanqing stumbling into the stairwell, and shortly after the man in black entering the building. The video had been technically manipulated to cleverly obscure the man in black's features, leaving only Su Wanqing's image, creating a strong implication that the crime occurred after she entered. Watching the video, Su Wanqing finally couldn't hold back any longer. She suddenly raised her head and shouted in a hoarse voice, "It's fake. It's all fake. That video has been edited. Gu Yan. It was Gu Yan who orchestrated this. He framed me." An uproar erupted in the courtroom. The presiding judge frowned and struck the gavel. "Defendant Su Wanqing, please maintain court order. Do you have any evidence to submit to the court?" "Evidence? My evidence is all in Gu Yan's hands." Su Wanqing struggled violently, the shackles rattling. "The MX-7 he implanted in me recorded everything. It proved that my heart rate was too high, that I was on the verge of shock, and I had no strength to kill anyone. And the chip in Lin Chuxia's phone, the raw data inside, can prove my innocence." Gu Yan. Gu Yan took the chip, he destroyed the evidence. She spoke incoherently, her eyes darting wildly, pointing to an empty seat in the gallery, Gu Yan's seat. But Gu Yan wasn't here today. He didn't need to be. His shadow loomed over the entire courtroom, but he himself was like a detached director hidden behind the scenes. The prosecutor calmly responded, "Defendant Su Wanqing, regarding the MX-7 monitoring device, according to the testimony of technical experts, the physiological data recorded by the device during the time of the incident is consistent with your stress response when you committed the crime. As for the so-called chip, our investigation revealed that Lin Chuxia's phone did not contain any additional storage chip. Your claim lacks factual basis. On the contrary, your fingerprints collected at the scene, as well as your motives and actions in fleeing, all point to you as a prime suspect. You're talking nonsense." Gu Yan bribed the experts. He bribed everyone. Su Wanqing screamed, acting like a madwoman. She knew she was trapped in a vicious cycle. Gu Yan controlled the chain of evidence. All her explanations seemed like the ravings of a madwoman in the face of the established facts. At that moment, the defense attorney made an application. "Your Honor, we request that key witness Zhang Ming be summoned to testify in court." Zhang Ming. Su Wanqing was suddenly jolted. Zhang Ming, the assistant she had forced out years ago, the director Zhang she had framed and who was now being promoted by Gu Yan. What was he doing here? To testify against her? Or, under the watchful eyes of the crowd, Zhang Ming stepped onto the witness stand. He wore a crisp white lab coat, his hair was neatly combed, and his expression was calm, even carrying a hint of barely perceptible superiority. After taking his oath, he began his testimony. He recounted the events of that surgery, how Su Wanqing's operational error led to Gu Yan's injury, how Su Wanqing coerced him into altering the medical records, and how he had carried the burden of guilt for so many years. His account was clear and logical, his emotions restrained, yet every word was piercing. He produced the photocopies of the medical records he had secretly kept from back then, and the audio recording of Su Wanqing instructing him to falsify data. Dr. Su said back then, if Gu Yan doesn't survive it or is left with a disability, that's fate. But my professional career cannot be tainted. Zhang Ming, you know what to do. Zhang Ming mimicked Su Wanqing's tone from back, then cold and resolute. Su Wanqing listened, her body turning ice cold. She wanted to refute, to say that the situation was urgent, to say that she transferred the patient to another hospital for Gu Yanhao's sake. But the evidence Zhang Ming presented, coupled with her own recorded quote, made any defense seem pale and powerless. She looked at Zhang Ming, the young man who had once been so subservient to her, now standing on the moral and factual high ground, nailing her down with the very nails she had planted herself. You're also Gu Yan's pawn. Su Wanqing murmured, her eyes filled with endless sorrow. She finally saw clearly that Gu Yan's net had not only ensnared her, but also Zhang Ming. Zhang Ming's testimony today was both a statement of facts and a pledge of allegiance to Gu Yan. They were all just pawns on Gu Yan's chessboard, including herself. After Zhang Ming's testimony, the trial entered its final stage. The prosecutor delivered his prosecution arguments, using strong language and demanding severe punishment. The defense lawyer made his final statement, but despite his best efforts, it proved futile in the face of overwhelming public opinion and irrefutable evidence. Finally, it was Su Wanqing's turn to give her final statement. She stood in the dock, looking around. Those once familiar faces now stared at her with disgust and hatred. The media's cameras, like countless eyes, greedily captured her final, pathetic moment. She opened her mouth, wanting to say something, but found her throat too dry to utter a complete sound. She wanted to protest her innocence, to expose Gu Yan's conspiracy, to tell everyone about the existence of MX7, to get everyone to investigate the destroyed chip in Lin Chuxia's phone. But she knew it was useless. Gu Yan had already won completely. Any explanation she offered would only make her a laughingstock. Finally, she slowly, with all her might, uttered a few words, her voice hoarse but clear. I confess. The moment those two words were uttered, the courtroom erupted in commotion once again. Even the presiding judge seemed slightly surprised. Su Wanqing, however, seemed to have a tremendous weight lifted from her shoulders, the bitter smile even appearing on her lips. Her confession wasn't about admitting to the fabricated charges, but about acknowledging her own arrogance, her own greed, and the sin of personally driving Gu Yan into a vengeful demon. From the moment she abandoned him on the operating table, from the moment she altered her sister's medical records for fame and fortune, her fate was sealed. At noon, the presiding judge struck the gavel again, announcing a brief recess for the panel of judges to deliberate. The wait was long and agonizing. Su Wanqing was escorted back to the waiting room, which was cold and empty, with only her there. She leaned against the cold wall and closed her eyes. What floated into her mind was not the clamor of the courtroom, but the image of Gu Yan years ago when he first entered the Su family. Back then, he was quiet and gentle, always silently typing code in a corner, his eyes clear. She disliked his dullness, disliked his lack of brilliance, but forgot that in those clear eyes, there had once been dependence and trust in her. It was she who personally extinguished that glimmer of light bit by bit, ultimately turning it into a raging fire of revenge. Half an hour later, the court reconvened. The presiding judge stood up and read the verdict. The defendant, Su Wanqing, was convicted of intentional homicide and sentenced to life imprisonment with deprivation of political rights for life. Convicted of embezzlement and bribery and sentenced to death with a 2-year reprieve. deprivation of political rights for life, and confiscation of all personal property. Convicted of misappropriation of funds and sentenced to life imprisonment with deprivation of political rights for life. Convicted of major medical malpractice and sentenced to 15 years imprisonment. The sentences were combined, and the final sentence was death with a 2-year reprieve, deprivation of political rights for life, and confiscation of all personal property. The defendant, Su Wanqing, committed a serious violation of medical ethics and trampled on the dignity of the law, causing extremely negative social impact. Based on the provisions of the law, this court renders the above judgment. If the defendant disagrees with the judgment, she may file an appeal with this court or directly with the Provincial Higher People's Court within 10 days from the second day after receiving the judgment. A suspended death sentence. Su Wanqing listened to the verdict without expression. This outcome was within her expectations. Gu Yan wouldn't let her die easily. Prison was the eternal execution ground he had prepared for her. The bailiffs handcuffed and shackled her again and escorted her out of the courtroom. As they passed the gallery, she finally couldn't help but glance at the empty seat that belonged to Gu Yan. There was only emptiness there, but it was as if he were sitting there, coldly watching her walk step by step into the abyss. Just as she was about to be led out of the courtroom, a bailiff quietly slipped her a folded note. Su Wanqing froze for a moment, then subconsciously clenched her fists. Only after she was put into the prison van and the iron gate slammed shut, cutting her off from the outside world, did she tremble as she unfolded the note in the swaying carriage, using the faint light filtering through the cracks. The note contained only one line of printed text, without a signature, but she recognized the cold, unadorned handwriting style immediately. Welcome to your new world. Daisies always bloom before Gu Yan's tombstone. Z. Su Wanqing clutched the note tightly, her knuckles turning white. Those words were like a curse branded onto her heart. Gu Yan was telling her that her suffering had only just begun. Within the high walls of prison, she would repent day after day, year after year, before Gu Yan's invisible tombstone, until the very end of her life. The prison van drove away from the courthouse and merged into the traffic. Su Wanqing leaned against the cold wall of the van, watching the street scene rushing past the window. Those tall buildings, those hurried people, were all gone from her. From then on, her world consisted only of high walls, electric fences, shackles, and the indelible regret in her heart, as well as the ever-present shadow of Gu Yan's revenge. She slowly raised her shackled hands, looked at the cold steel ring around her wrists, and suddenly laughed softly. The laughter echoed in the closed carriage, shrill and desperate, like the mournful cry of an owl. The trial is over. But for Su Wanqing, the real punishment was only just beginning. Gu Yan, using the guise of the law, tailored a prison uniform for her, a uniform that would condemn her to life imprisonment. And the weight of this uniform was enough to crush her soul into the deepest hell, condemning her to eternal damnation. On the other side of the city, Gu Yan stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Zero Organization headquarters, watching the ant-like flow of cars below. He toyed with a small, blood-stained microchip in his hand, the one he had taken from Lin Chuxiao's phone, the chip containing part of the truth. He watched the prison van's trajectory on the screen, a faint, cold smile curving his lips. Game over, Su Wanqing. He muttered to himself, then gently tossed the chip into the shredder on the table. Buzz. The chip was reduced to dust. All the truth, all the evidence, all the love and hate vanished completely with that buzzing sound. All that remained was an utterly destroyed woman and a meticulously woven, eternal nightmare called revenge. A women's prison in a northwestern province in the 7th Ward. The sky here always seems lower than outside, cut into a narrow strip by towering gray walls and layers of electric fences. The wind whistles through the bare poplar trees on the playground, sounding like a sob, much like the sound Su Wanqing has heard in her dreams over the years. 5 years have passed. Su Wanqing sat in front of the sewing machine, mechanically pedaling. Her number was 0729. Her prison uniform, faded from washing, hung loosely over her emaciated body. Her hands, once so steady they could precisely suture even capillaries with a scalpel, were now calloused and punctured by tiny needle marks, slightly deformed from years of manual labor. Her hair was completely white, meticulously tucked into her cap. Her face was lined with wrinkles that her eyes clouded, indistinguishable from the other female prisoners around her, whose faces were equally numb. The trial of the century 5 years ago seemed like yesterday, but the noise, the flashing lights, the spittle flying in the courtroom, all of that was now a distant memory. A suspended death sentence that commuted to life imprisonment was her final fate. She never appealed again, nor did she ever try to defend herself. In her second year in prison, she attempted to stab herself in the throat with a sharpened toothbrush, but was stopped by her cellmates. From then on, she became unusually quiet, like a breathing, living corpse. The correctional officers always gave her a forward evaluation of her reform performance, passive resistance. Yes, what was the meaning of her life? Repentance? She repented every day, repenting before the photo on Gu Nian's tombstone, repenting before her hands stained with invisible blood. But repentance changed nothing. Gu Yan won completely. He used the law, public opinion, and her own greed and arrogance to weave this eternal cage for her. The lunch break whistle blew. The prisoners, like a flock of gray sparrows, silently lined up for their meals. Su Wanqing carried an aluminum lunchbox containing only bland cabbage and radish soup and half a hard steamed bun. She found a corner and ate silently. The food was cold and hard to swallow, but she was used to it. Her sense of taste had deteriorated during her first year in prison. Perhaps because of the bitterness in her heart, everything tasted the same. 0729. Visiting time. The voice of the correctional officer rang out at the canteen entrance, devoid of any emotion. Su Wanqing's hand holding the lunchbox trembled violently, spilling a few grains of rice. A visit? 5 years, and never a visit. The Su family had long since severed ties with her. Former friends and colleagues avoided her like the plague. And Gu Yan, he was even less likely to come. She put down her lunchbox, mechanically stood up, and followed the correctional officer out of the canteen. Their footsteps echoed through the long corridor lined with iron bars on both sides. The visiting room still smelled of disinfectant. Through the thick, bulletproof glass, she saw the person sitting opposite her. It wasn't Gu Yan. He was a middle-aged man in a sharp suit and gold-rimmed glasses with a refined demeanor, but also a professional aloofness. Su Wanqing squinted her cloudy eyes, trying to make out the man's name for a long time before finally pulling it out from the corner of her memory. Li Wei. Gu Yan's chief legal officer and the current executive director of the Gu Yan Foundation. Li Wei was holding a folder. When he saw Su Wanqing enter, he merely raised his eyelids slightly, without any intention of exchanging pleasantries. He pressed the call button, indicating that Su Wanqing could speak. Su Wanqing picked up the receiver, her throat dried, unable to make a sound. Li Wei spoke first, his voice coming through the receiver, steady yet cold. Su Wanqing, Mr. Gu asked me to come see you. Also, to inform you of a few things. Mr. Gu. This address was like a needle, piercing Su Wanqing's numb nerves. She gripped the receiver tightly, her knuckles turning white. First, the Gu Yan Foundation celebrated its 5th anniversary, having cumulatively assisted over 3,000 families impoverished or disabled due to medical malpractice and funded 17 medical ethics research projects. Mr. Gu believes this is the most valuable thing he has done with your money. Li Wei opened the folder, his tone as calm as if he were reading an annual report. Su Wanqing's lips twitched. Her money, her 3 billion, had now become a footnote under Gu Yan's charitable halo. Secondly, Su's medical group completed a new round of restructuring last month, officially changing its name to Gu Yan Medical Technology and listing on NASDAQ, with a market value exceeding 100 billion. The original Su's group brand has become history. Li Wei continued, his gaze sweeping over Su Wanqing's face, which had turned deathly pale. Mr. Gu said that business matters always need to be resolved. Now that it's resolved. Su Wanqing closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and felt the cold air sting her lungs. The Su family was gone. The empire her father had built, and the one she had once been so proud of, had completely changed its name, and even her name had become an inscription commemorating her sins. Third, Li Wei paused, seemingly considering his words. Zhang Ming, now academician Zhang, received the State Preeminent Science and Technology Award last week. The Intelligent Surgical Assistance System he led the development of has reduced the surgical error rate to below 0.01%. Mr. Gu said, This can be considered a kind of technological compensation for your failed surgery back then. Zhang Ming, academician. Su Wanqing suddenly opened her eyes, a glint of jealousy, resentment, and despair flashing within them. The ant she once trampled underfoot was now a revered academician, while she, in this dark prison cell, eked out a living by sewing. Gu Yan not only wanted to destroy her present, but also to elevate the person she once scorned, thus highlighting her own insignificance and ridiculousness. What else did he say? Su Wanqing's voice was hoarse, as if she hadn't spoken in a long time. Li Wei looked at her, his eyes devoid of pity, only a barely perceptible hint of mockery. Mr. Gu said that you asked him back then, besides this face and that bit of code, what else did he have? Now it seems that what he had was patience, the ability to strategize, and the ability to make a self-righteous genius like you look up at his achievements while you're stuck in the mire. He also said. Li Wei paused at the wreckage of the MX-7 he kept in the lab, as the only physical evidence that you once existed. MX-7. The miniature device buried inside her, witnessing all her humiliation, betrayal, and pain. It had been removed and destroyed, but Gu Yan kept the remains. This wasn't just humiliation. It was crushing her last shred of dignity into dust. Su Wanqing could no longer hold on and began coughing violently, bending over with tears and snot mingling together. She wanted to curse, to scream, to tell Li Wei that it was all Gu Yan's conspiracy, but she knew it was useless. Li Wei was just a mouthpiece. Gu Yan was the one who controlled everything. The last thing. Li Wei's voice was still steady, but with a heavy pronouncement-like tone. Gu Yan. Miss Gu passed away last month. Snap. The receiver fell from Su Wanqing's hand onto the table with a dull thud. She froze, even stopping her coughing, staring blankly at Li Wei across the glass, as if she hadn't understood the meaning of his words. Gu Yan is dead? The younger sister who was ruined for life because of her mistake, the only reason Gu Yan sought revenge, the origin of the Gu Yan Foundation's name, is dead. Li Wei seemed unconcerned by her reaction and continued. Complications. Complete immune system failure. Mr. Gu stayed with her until the very end. Before Gu Yan passed away, Mr. Gu asked her if she wanted to see him one last time. Gu Yan. Li Wei paused, then repeated. Gu Yan said, "Let him hate my sister. Hate lasts longer than forgiveness. My sister ruined my life. So let her spend the rest of her life paying for it with guilt. I won't forgive her. And I don't want her apology." No, that's not how it is. Su Wanqing trembled, grabbing the receiver and pressing it to her ear, her words tumbling out incoherently. "I can apologize. I'm willing to apologize, Gu Yan." But all he heard from the receiver was a busy tone. Li Wei had already hung up the phone, put away his folder, stood up, and gave Su Wanqing behind the glass a slight nod, a polite but cold farewell. Then he turned and left the visiting room, the sound of his leather shoes on the floor fading into the distance. Su Wanqing slumped into her chair, the receiver dangling in midair, swaying. Gu Yan was dead, carrying with her resentment and curse. Gu Yan had won, gaining wealth, status, fame, and even the blessing of his sister's dying will to avenge him. She, however, had lost everything, and would spend the rest of her life burdened by Gu Yan's unforgiving curse, slowly rotting away in guilt and regret. The correctional officer walked over, patted her on the shoulder, and gestured for her to go back. Su Wanqing didn't react at all, like a soulless stone statue. The officer increased the pressure, and only then did she stand up stiffly like a puppet, dragging her heavy steps out of the visiting room. It was already evening when they returned to their cell. The whistles signaling the end of exercise time blew, and the prisoners were herded back to their cells. Su Wanqing huddled on her bunk, her back to the others, facing the cold wall. Some unknown stains on the wall resembled distorted faces, mocking her fate. She remembered many years ago, when Gu Yan had just come to the Su family. He was afraid of the dark at night, and she, finding him annoying, locked him alone in a dark room. Did he cry then? She couldn't remember. She only remembered that the next morning he came out with red eyes. But he didn't say anything, only silently handing her a glass of warm water. What's the difference between the warm water back then and the icy cold water in prisons now? She recalled those 7 hours on the operating table, When she abandoned him, was he just as helpless, cold, and desperate as he was now? At the time that she thought he wouldn't die, that he was insignificant. Now it seemed that the one who truly couldn't die, that yet suffered a fate worse than death, that was herself. Gu Yan's death was like the last straw, breaking her already fragile mental defenses. Gu Yan didn't let her die, but used the news of her sister's death to deliver the most fatal blow. To live burdened with endless regret and the despair of unforgivable suffering, it was the cruelest punishment Gu Yan had prepared for her. Night had fallen. The prison was deathly silent save for the distant buzzing of searchlights on the watchtowers and the occasional bark of a dog. Su Wanqing stared wide-eyed at the perpetually stubborn stain on the ceiling. Moonlight streamed through the iron bars, casting a pale, eerie patch on the floor, like a miniature, cold tombstone. She slowly raised her hand, looking at her withered fingers. These hands had once saved lives, and had also harmed people. Now they could do nothing but count the days, waiting for death. She suddenly began to hum a song softly. It was a nursery rhyme that Gu Yan had loved to listen to as a child many years ago. She sang it off-key, her voice hoarse, yet it echoed with unusual clarity in the deathly still night. The insects fly, the insects fly, who are you thinking of? There was no resentment or anger in the song, only boundless desolation and regret. She finally understood that Gu Yan's revenge was most successful not in destroying her body, but in destroying her spiritual core, making her slowly torture herself over the long years. Meanwhile, in the top-floor president's office of Gu Yan Medical Technology in Binhai City, thousands of miles away. Gu Yan stood before the enormous floor-to-ceiling window, overlooking the dazzling lights of countless homes below. He held a glass of amber-colored liquor, swirling it gently. Li Wei stood behind him, reporting in a low voice. Sir, the visit is complete. As you instructed, we informed her of Miss Gu Yan's passing. Gu Yan didn't turn around, but simply gave a faint hum. Su Wanqing's reaction. Li Wei hesitated for a moment. According to feedback from the prison, she was extremely emotionally unstable, but she did not cry or make a fuss. She just kept humming a nursery rhyme. Gu Yan stopped swirling his wine glass. His back was to Li Wei, his face hidden in shadow, only his jawline taut. Nursery rhymes. That was Gu Yan's favorite. He hadn't expected Su Wanqing to still remember. Sir, should we try to influence the prison authorities to improve her treatment? Li Wei asked tentatively. In his view, Su Wanqing was already completely ruined, and there was no need to push her to the brink. Gu Yan remained silent for a long time, so long that Li Wei thought he wouldn't answer anymore. No need. Gu Yan finally spoke, her voice calm, and even yet carrying an undeniable resolve. Maintain the status quo. Let her live, let her sing that song, until she can no longer sing it. This is what she owes Gu Yan, and what she owes me. He turned around, his face expressionless, his eyes as deep and unfathomable as a frozen pool. The revenge that had lasted 5 years and consumed countless efforts of his life had finally come to a cold end today, with the passing of Gu Yan and the complete mental breakdown of Su Wanqing. He walked to the desk, where an exquisite sandalwood box sat. Opening the box, he found not gold or silver jewelry, but the shattered remains of the MX-7 monitoring device, and a yellowed copy of the torn and pieced-together divorce agreement that Su Wanqing had signed years ago. He picked up the agreement, his fingertips brushing against the dried bloodstains and creases. Then he put the agreement back in the box and gently closed the lid. After delivering the message, Gu Yan told Li Wei, his tone regaining its usual calm. The Foundation's next focus would shift to aiding children with rare diseases. Also, record the nursery rhyme Su Wanqing hummed in prison and play it for her every year on the anniversary of Gu Yan's death. Yes, sir. Li Wei left. Silence returned to the office. Gu Yan walked back to the window, looking out at the business empire he had built with his own hands. He had won the whole world. But he had also lost forever the sister who had once given him a warm smile, and the wife he had once thought he could spend his life with. The flames of revenge have been extinguished, leaving behind not joy, but a desolate wasteland of ashes. He picked up his glass and downed the liquor in one gulp. The strong liquor burned his throat, but it couldn't warm the eternal ice in his heart. Su Wanqing, he murmured the name, his voice fading into the empty office. Our game is over, but your nightmare has only just begun. Outside the window, the night was deep. The city's neon lights obscured the starlight, just like his heart at that moment, that where light and darkness intertwined, indistinguishable from one another. The dust settled and the embers reignited, but what reignited was no longer hatred, but a deep-seated, eternal desolation accompanied by regret and loneliness. In the cramped cell of the prison, Su Wanqing's singing gradually faded, eventually turning into a long, desperate sigh that blended into the long night and disappeared without a trace.